Item 19.
Right. Item number 19 is our 3 o'clock special order. It is a hearing of the Board of Supervisors sitting as a committee of the whole on responses from management to deputy sheriff's complaints about overcrowding and understaffing in the jails and the impact of jail lockdowns in San Francisco County jails resulting from overcrowding and understaffing, including but not limited to impacts to the public health, wellness, and personal safety of both inmates and deputy sheriffs, as well as impacts to the incarcerated individuals' rights to family visits or in-jail programs.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, we are now sitting as a committee of the whole to discuss the impacts of the lockdowns in San Francisco County jails, as the clerk stated, resulting from overcrowding and understaffing. We have the Sheriff's Office, including Sheriff Miyamoto, the Deputy Sheriff's Association, the Inspector General of the Sheriff's Department Oversight Board, as well as the Public Defender's Office here to present and report. With that, Supervisor Walton, do you have any opening remarks?
Thank you so much, President Peskin. Colleagues, it was brought to our attention recently that the Sheriff's Department was locking down the jails due to attacks on deputies. I want to find out what the department is doing to protect deputies, ensure the rights of people in custody are protected, and what needs to be done to keep everyone safe. We need to know the impacts of staffing on deputies, as well as how this affects the city's budget. In addition, what are the plans to fill all the available vacant positions within the department? What are the plans of improving the jail conditions? And how can we lessen the burden on staff? Today we will hear from the Sheriff's Department, Deputy Sheriff's Association, the Inspector General, the lead for the Sheriff's Oversight Department, and the Public Defender's Office. All the presenters, please keep in mind that we do have a full agenda today, so please keep your presentations to the 5 to 7 minute time frame. And through the chair, President Peskin, just want to know if colleagues have anything they want to add before we hear from our first presenter.
Seeing no questions from colleagues, Sheriff Miyamoto, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, President Peskin, members of the board. Thank you very much for hosting us and for this inquiry. We're looking forward to making sure that we can present in a timely manner, not just the lockdown situation and the impacts that had on our system, but also give you a flavor of what it is to be in our jail system, to be a part of it, whether you're a member of our sheriff's office or one of our many partners from the community and from other city agencies, or whether you're a member of our incarcerated population. And I wanted to start our presentation actually with a reference that was just recently in the media regarding jail conditions. Interview with an inmate who is currently in our custody through Mission Local, I believe it was a few weeks ago, or May 7th. There's some quotes that I wanted to share to give an idea of what it is actually like inside the jail. The first of which is in regards to our population. As you can see from the slide, quote unquote, it's a new breed of inmate in here. They don't respect anything. They are mentally unwell. Most of them are drug addicts. It's total chaos. I'd also like to reference the second part of the next quote. He references prison here, but we're not a prison, we're a county jail. There are differences, and unfortunately, those differences have changed over the years where an individual would rather go to state prison rather than stay in county jail. He did say, though, of the population, they're mentally ill and have difficult behavioral issues. Then he said of our staff, the staff are more humane than they were even 5 or 10 years ago. I don't blame them for anything going on here. They just don't know how to deal with this type of person. As we go to the next slide, we've encapsulated what our current population actually looks like in a snapshot. I do want to bring to your attention the fact that our population has increased. Over the course of a year, we've seen about a 36% increase. And as you know, our average daily population, which you receive every day, fluctuates. And we have movement in that population, but we appear to be in or around 1,200 individuals a day right now. Of that number, As you can see on the slide, on the graphic to the right, a number of those individuals have what we classify as behavioral health problems. That's both psychiatric disorders and substance use disorders. And as you can see from the indications there, those are the numbers of those individuals in our population that we have our classification system set up on to make sure everyone is housed appropriately with individuals who they get along with and who are appropriate for their mental state. I know that yesterday we sent out a report for all of you, an executive summary. These slides, I forgot to say in the beginning of our presentation that these slides are in reference to some of the materials that you'll see in that more comprehensive report. Also on this slide, you'll see a number of the programs that we have at both housing facilities. Our county jails are comprised of 3 different jails. The first, County Jail 1, is an intake and release facility. The second and the third are housing facilities where individuals stay for longer periods of time. The programs are listed here at County Jail 2 and County Jail 3. I believe a copy of this presentation will be provided for you, so in the interest of time, we'll go to the next slide. The next slide, we have additional quotes from the individual, inmate Zuri Wilson. These are in direct reference to the staff that we have available, and I do want to highlight where he's mentioned that it's a new kind of staff, people from the same cultural backgrounds as us. They are not racist. I feel bad for these deputies. They're working class people, and they are not in here abusing us. He also highlights the conditions of confinement at the end of the second part of the quote, where he mentions that the quality of life behind bars here in county jail has gotten worse for both inmates and deputies guarding them. For our staff, we've made continuous efforts to hire. We are at a deficit, and as you can see in this next graphic, that we have a custody operations division which is operating at 78% staffing right now. And when you see that number between authorized and actual, I do want to point out that our job is very dangerous. And while we work in a confined setting, which we have safety measures in place so that dangerous weapons, guns, drugs don't get in, there is still the ability and capacity for individuals to attack others, both inmate to inmate or staff to inmate. And that creates a dangerous environment for us. So our actual number doesn't reflect people on duty. That includes people that have been injured in many of these fights and many of these responses to fights and physical altercations, which leads to time off due to disability. And that number, while it shows as 386, includes those people. For recruitment and hiring on staff, just to go through this very quickly, our goal is to hire at minimum 75 individuals a year. That's been my goal since I've gotten into office. We have a number of other programs that we work on infused into our recruitment efforts. We have our commitment to the 30 by 30 initiative to bring in 30% women by 2030. We have our continuous use of Prop F retirees, otherwise known as 960, which is a reflection of how many hours they can work as annuitants in our system. They help us with overtime backfill and addressing operational needs. We currently, and this number also fluctuates, because just this morning I swore in 2 new deputies. Yesterday I attended a graduation for 3 deputies. So we have ongoing hiring, training, recruiting, where we're trying to create a number closer to what we can work with. This slide says currently we have 195 sworn vacancies, but I'm sure that number has changed since we created this slide. We're training for transparency. One of the things that has come in very useful for us is the body-worn camera, as you'll see when we talk about the lockdown. We have the ability to deploy about 300 of these right now, and we have asked for more. We also want to make sure that we have the proper protective equipment for our staff and make sure that the environment itself is safe as well. The newest jail that we have is County Jail 3, and that was opened in 2005. Right now, we're operating County Jail 2, which was actually brand new when I started back in '96. I believe we started operating out of there in '94. Next page. In regards to the lockdown itself that Supervisor Walton mentioned earlier in his opening remarks, we did have a lockdown in our jails that was deliberate and measured in response to an increase in assaults that we saw on our staff during this timeline that you see on the slide. That increase in assault led us to believe there may be something else going on. It led us to believe that we would have to lock down the facilities in order to make sure we do follow-up investigations and keep people safe. I'm happy to say that there did not appear in our preliminary investigation any connectivity between the attacks. However, that doesn't take away from the seriousness of the issue, which is the fact that there has been an increase. I do want to mention also, if you can go to the next slide, please. And I'm accelerating this. I'm sure there's time for questions later if I've skipped over anything that you may have interest in. This last slide highlights the impacts on our staff and inmates. And if you take a look at this, we're very concerned because, as I mentioned earlier, although we have staff assigned, one of the impacts on us is when people get hurt. And there is a percentage of individuals who have been hurt, who are out on disability, but who still count as people assigned to those places and affect our ability to staff them up to our minimum staffing requirements. I also want to highlight in this slide the strain on our health services with the increase in our population. The density of the population, commensurate with those rise in numbers, has affected our ability and the ability of our jail health services staff to deliver services properly. We have a rapid turnover of our population. As you can see, 76% of our people are released in 7 days. And that turnover is challenging to put people on proper medical plans. If we can go to the next slide. I do want to say in closing, well, actually going over the slide first, we are looking at, as mentioned in the previous slides, workplace improvements to include improvements to our environment, and that will include also improvements to staff areas for what we call down rooms, places where our staff are actually allowed to stay and rest and sleep between shifts if they have long commutes or if they don't have a long period of time between shifts. We currently have and have asked for more body cameras, and we currently have and continue to ask for more tasers to help make our environments safer. Our recruitment efforts, I've already mentioned. I will look to, as we listen to the presentation from the DSA, hopeful that we will have coordinated and combined recruitment efforts so it does not appear that we are not working together. I also want to highlight in this last part of the slide that we have asked for these items in previous requests on our budget. These are things which have not been funded over the past few years and things that I believe are tied into making sure that we have support for our system to get people out of custody with both pretrial diversion and our discharge planning. So with that, I just want to say thank you first for allowing for us to present this information and material. I want to thank our deputies and our jail health service partners and our community partners who are all a part of our ecosystem in the jails, which can find itself to be a very dangerous place to work at times because we are dealing with the people that have enough challenges that they've been placed in our criminal justice system. And we need to be mindful of, under these challenging circumstances, our staff continue to do a great job in terms of keeping individuals safe from each other and themselves and keeping their coworkers and cohorts safe as well. And remember, please, that just because the jails are not visible, just like our streets are, doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay attention to the challenges, just as we've paid attention to the challenges on our streets, to the challenges that we face in jail. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Miyamoto. And Supervisor, I have questions for Sheriff Miyamoto as well. Supervisor Walton requests that we hear from all four speakers and then hold our questions if that's acceptable to colleagues. So next, we will go to the head of the Deputy Sheriff's Association, their president, Ken Lamba. Mr. Lamba, please come forward.
Thank you, Board of Supervisors, for the hearing. I really appreciate it. We do have a PowerPoint presentation we're going to put up as well. We'll show you some numbers. Let me set that up right now. Okay, thank you. So, thank you for the hearing. The hearing is about lockdowns in San Francisco County jails resulting from overcrowding and understaffing. I didn't hear the Sheriff's Department really point out any solutions to this. I didn't hear, a lot of answers to your questions, but I want to go over a couple of things. The violence in the jails has increased. Statistics show that prisoner versus prisoner fights have increased about 45% from 2021 to 2023. Attacks on staffs from 2021 to 2023 have increased about 380%. We have increased lockdowns. There's been a lot of increased stress and frustration on the incarcerated people. You can see a lot of the lockdowns in the documents that I sent in. They're happening several times a week. All of that is related to our understaffing. In 2019, you'll see on this PowerPoint, we're understaffed about negative 48 deputies. During that time period, it's increased all the way to 2024 up to 175. And you'll notice that it's steadily increased all the way to 2024. So this shows that the effort for recruiting and hiring and staffing has not been there. We are hiring, we're not even matching an attrition rate. We should not be at these amounts. This is why we're getting consistent lockdowns, safety issues, attacks, fights. San Francisco and the people of San Francisco, the San Francisco values were to have a safe and humane jail. And now we're just talking about the jail system, with our deputies there, which were understaffed, and we don't have that. Also, the Sheriff's Department's on the streets. So we're short-staffed in the jail, we're short-staffed on the streets. How are we really making an impact on public safety? Hiring has to increase. So the staffing has to increase. We can't keep going down this negative spiral and being downsized, because that effect of being downsized and the negative effect or the negative amounts of deputies in our department is impacting safety. It's negatively impacting public safety. Okay, and I just wanted to give you a little snapshot of the jails. So these are the amount of deputies assigned to the jails specifically. This is March 2023. There were 298 deputies assigned there. At that time, we were negative 91 deputies. That was 22% below the authorized amount of, should be 389 deputies. At that time, the jail population was 817. Now our jail population's increased, as the sheriff said, to over 1,200. And in March of 2024, we only had 285 deputies working in custody in the jail system. That's a negative 106 deputies, more so than 2023. So we are 27% below the authorized amount. And that's the authorized amount of the Sheriff's Department, which we believe may even be lower than what it should be based on our professional studies. Go ahead. In regards to overcrowding, the sheriff had a 40% increase in incarcerated people. As he spoke, we're up to 1,200. The sheriff, over this time, the sheriff's decreased deputy sheriffs by 16%. If you compare that, the last couple slides, 2023 to 2024, it was a decrease of 16.48% by March 2024. With the mismanaged staffing comes lockdowns when there aren't enough deputies to keep it safe. Housing units get locked down. Lockdowns disrupt the daily routine of the jails. It increases stress, frustration, which in some cases turns into anger and violence. It increases health issues for deputy sheriffs and incarcerated people. So when the incarcerated people are locked down consistently, their days are disrupted, the routines are disrupted, it increases stress, it increases frustration. Yes, you have overcrowding, you have condensed areas, but if you look at our jail system, we have bed space for 1,500, and the sheriff may or may not spoke about the expansion in the annex, but there's only 2 dorms open that are upgraded now, so our max is about 1,280. So he has to increase that to open more space to ease the crowding. But in order to do that, guess what? You need deputy sheriffs. You need more deputies. He has to increase hiring because right now the annex is basically run on overtime. And we have this big problem with perpetual overtime in the department. Okay, Sheriff's Office has built mandatory overtime into the staffing plan. That's a huge problem for us because our deputies are exhausted, they're having health issues, And when you're exhausted, your performance level goes down, your reactionary time goes down. There's an increase in blood pressure problems, diabetes, sleep issues, high rates of depression because of this. It's not healthy. And I mean, the San Francisco people have got to realize this is not a healthy environment. You have to hire, you have to increase hire. That has to be the priority, and we don't see it. Okay, overtime, we're going to go over overtime has increased. The past study showed that deputy sheriffs worked an average of 16 hours of overtime per week. It's now increased to 28 hours per week on an average, and this is a 75% increase. So the sheriff's office temporarily changed the policy and mandating overtime from 3 times to 2 times a week. 3 times they were able to mandate us to work 3 times, 3 extra shifts per week, and was reduced to 2 times. So although that eased the mandatory overtime on some people, what happened is now it forced more overtime on more people. So now more deputies have to work mandatory overtime. And we're going down this road of running the department on overtime, more mandatory overtime. It's unhealthy. People are getting sick. Inmates are getting sick. Deputies are getting sick. Inmates are getting injured. Deputies are getting injured. This is a very bad path. Okay. Oh, staffing needed, of course, right? The number one priority is the health and well-being of the deputy sheriffs, as I stated, professional staff, and incarcerated people. That should always be the number one priority. To reduce stress, frustrations, illnesses, high rates of depression, severe medical conditions, staffing must be a priority. Recruiting and hiring needs to be prioritized and not manipulated. Our hired professionals state that Sheriff's Office needs to hire at least 300 more deputies to reduce the forced overtime and have a healthy workforce. Okay, let's talk about some solutions. I didn't hear a lot of solutions from the Sheriff's Office, so we're going to provide some solutions for you. This specific one, number one, work for the police department was done by the mayor. She eliminated the first step of pay for new hires at the police department. That has increased their eligibility list. It has increased their applicants. The same thing should be done at the Sheriff's Department. Eliminate the first step. You're going to start off at a higher rate. You're going to attract more people, more applicants. You're going to get a bigger eligibility list, better selection of candidates. Number 2, we need to freeze the vacant FTE funding to hire only. The Sheriff's Office, the vacant FTE funding, they use to spend it on overtime constantly. It's a guarantee. If we could freeze a portion of that, carve it out, and say, put this on reserve for hiring only to stop this perpetual problem of mandatory overtime. Number 3, we need to stop the Sheriff's Office from detailing background investigators to vacant positions throughout the Sheriff's Office. You believe this? We need to hire people, and the Sheriff's Department is detailing out our own background investigators to vacant positions in other places in the department, slowing down the hiring process, canceling appointments, and having to restart all over again. So, and then we're going to go on. Another way to increase, which you'll see in the data that I sent you guys, is to increase the outsourcing of background investigators. To give you an example, San Mateo has 6 full-time background investigators, deputy sheriffs. They have 15 outsourced background investigators. We have about 7 or 8 background investigators full-time, a couple part-time prop Fs, maybe 1 contract to outsource. San Mateo has 15 outsourced. I mean, talk about getting serious about hiring. Okay, secondly, another idea, fund a national recruitment effort. Hey, the U.S. is our marketplace. Let's shop around. Let's get it out to job seekers. Let's bring them in from other states. Let's fill these vacancies. We have a severe shortage. We need to do a fast-track out-of-state hiring. Many departments are doing this. We also could create a relocation fund to assist these people from coming over from out of state till they get on their own 2 feet here. Let's talk about improving conditions for incarcerated people. How are we going to do that without deputy sheriffs and staffing? You can't. You can't make it better for them. We need more deputy sheriffs. And when you do that, there's a couple ideas we want to suggest. These ideas will reduce stress and frustration in the facilities. First of all, with the free telephone services at the San Bruno jails, we need to increase the amount of telephones. There's a limited amount of phones in each pod. We need to increase that to reduce stress and frustration of other incarcerated people trying to use the phones. There simply aren't enough phones. We should have more schools, more specialized training, more trade schools. We should increase outdoor recreation options. We should have access to outdoor sunshine for the incarcerated people. But we need the number one priority: hire more deputies. Has to be done. Haven't heard that from the sheriff's office. Next. Okay, currently the sheriff's office is running on fumes. This is a disservice to the public of San Francisco. The sheriff's office is an unhealthy environment and unsafe. The understaffing is causing health issues, dangerous incidents for deputies, staff, and incarcerated people. But not only that, the sheriff's office is doing the public a disservice by understaffing the field units as well. The sheriff's office barely has enough deputies to even check on the criminally charged participants in the alternatives to incarceration. No one is watching in many cases. The sheriff's office does not even have enough deputy sheriffs to retrieve individuals with outstanding warrants. We have a warrant service unit of 7 deputies. 2 are detailed to the police department, to some specialty units. They're doing an excellent job. So now we have 5 warrant service members on the streets when they're not detailed somewhere else to look for outstanding warrants for all of San Francisco and whatever it may lead. That's not enough. You compare to Sacramento County, they have about 30. They have their SRT team out there. They have a warrants unit out there. They're all active and working. We're doing a big disservice to San Francisco. The only solution is to increase hiring. It has to be done. It has to be a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamba. And next, we will go to Terry Wiley, the Inspector General of the Office of the Inspector General of the Sheriff's Department.
Good afternoon, members of the Board of Supervisors. I'm Terry Wiley, the new Inspector General of San Francisco. I'm going to probably read this because I got only 5 minutes, and so I want to be able to get everything that I have prepared to you. But to just start off by telling you, as the Inspector General, our job is to give an objective assessment of the issues going on with the Sheriff's Department and basically go wherever the facts lead us. And that is pretty much what we've done in this report. But I first want to start off by letting you know, give you an overview of the sources of information that we relied on. We met with the inmates. We met with community-based organizations, including the San Francisco Jail Justice Coalition and particularly the Latino Task Force. We met with jail service providers. I personally met with Dave Maroff, the CEO of San Francisco Pretrial Services, Pretrial Diversion Project. We met with Inmate Legal Services Director Nick Gregados. We met with the Sheriff's Department command staff and the sheriff. We met with Ali Riker, who is the Director of Programs at the jails. We also had a meeting with Kim Lambda, the President of the Deputy Sheriff's Association. We also reviewed a sleep study commissioned by the Deputy Sheriff's Association. And we also conducted our own research that we haven't completed, but we are looking at the impact of excessive work hours on the performance of deputies and whether there's a correlation between, or whether a correlation exists between extended work hours and complaints. So here's our preliminary assessment. First, we addressed violent incidents against deputies at the jail causing recent lockdowns. We found staffing shortages do contribute to lockdowns and the length of the lockdowns. We found certain pods were locked down to conduct investigations after the deputies were assaulted, but it also led to larger jail lockdowns because of the redeployment of staff. So they were already short on staff, and when you have an attack on a deputy and they have to conduct an investigation, they have to redeploy staff from one pod in order to support the pod that they're investigating, and that causes the overall lockdown. We also found a violent incident of one area of the jail it does require the redeployment of staff to other parts of the jail, and that can result in, like I said, the overall lockdown of the jails. We also found different areas and different shifts have set minimum staffing levels established by the collective bargaining agreement. So if you go below those staffing levels set out in the collective bargaining agreement, you have to shut down that portion of the jail. And we found that that occurred on a number of occasions. We found that there are areas falling below minimum levels. Well, no, we didn't find, but there are areas falling below minimum levels that will trigger and cause extended lockdowns. Now, overcrowding. We looked at overcrowding of the jail and its impact. Overcrowding may contribute to some of the violent incidents and exacerbate the understaffing issues. It's been stated that the jail population pre-COVID was at about 800. Since then, it's climbed to about 1,200. And that's about a 35 to 40% increase in the number of inmates at the jail. And the jail staffing has not been proportionate in its increase. So it puts a lot more demand on the staffing of the sheriff's department. The composition, and I think the sheriff addressed this, but the composition of the inmates has changed over the last 5 to 10 years, and that you do find, and what we found was inmates that are, a large number of inmates that are detoxing. We found inmates that are mentally ill, but there are also some inmates that are just mentally unstable. And so you had some of the mentally unstable inmates being housed in general population. And I think that that is what Zuri, the inmate, is talking about, is that in the old days, there was a lot more order in the jail. And I think that what they're finding today is there is a lot more disorder. And part of the contributing factor to that is the change in the complexion of the inmates. You have inmates that are detoxing. You have more inmates with mental illness issues, and less space to house them. And when you look at the higher concentration of inmates in the jail, it's the same thing that plays out on the street. One of the reasons we have higher crime in poor areas is that you generally find there is a higher concentration of people in those areas. And the same thing is occurring in the jail. There's higher concentrations of people. And we also found that the sheriff's department's approach in using a more de-escalative approach to dealing with the inmates may in some cases contribute to them being susceptible to attack because the inmates don't think the sheriffs are going to do anything about it if they get attacked. We also found that bail reform and some of the issues that are going on in the courts are contributing to an increased number of inmates in the jail. So, for example, I know in the case of the San Francisco District Attorney's Office that there is a greater focus on holding those individuals in custody that just after COVID were being released. And in most cases, if you have an individual who's charged with a misdemeanor and you decide to keep that person in custody, it generally takes about 3 court appearances before that person is adjudicated, and that can result in a 90-day stay for somebody who is now charged with only a misdemeanor. And I think that those are some of the issues that are also contributing to the increase in the number of inmates at the jail. Now, the biggest complaint by the inmates was the significant disruptions in their daily lives and the lack of access to programming and services and no visitation from their loved ones when there's a lockdown. The other thing is that if you're in one pod, and because they have to redeploy manpower from one pod to the pod where there's an incident, both pods get locked down, and the inmates in the pod where nothing happened become highly incensed because they said nobody in this pod did anything, yet we're being locked down. And there are little things that we as individuals who have our freedom appreciate that, such as being able to shave, being able to take a shower, being able to go out into the sunlight. All of this contributes to a more combustive situation and a more dangerous situation for the deputies and the inmates. Now, our initial recommendations are these. The over-reliance on excessive overtime is not sustainable. And you are going to continue to see the quality of life of the inmates and the deputies go down as long as there is this disproportionate reliance on overtime. And that was brought up by Mr. Lamba. And overtime is also very costly to the city and county of San Francisco. So what are our recommendations? Well, we recommend redeploying staff from non-charter assignments back to charter assignments. And I know that's something that everyone will have to work out, but that's the only solution we see, that because the hiring is not keeping pace with the demand. The only way to increase the support of the deputies at the jail is to redeploy those deputies that are in current non-charter assignments, and those are those deputies that are out on the street.
Mr. President, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yes, what is a non-charter assignment?
Yes, could you list the charter?
Yeah, the charter assignment means that the charter requires the sheriff to take care of the jail.
Okay, and any other duty they're doing is a non-chartered assignment?
Well, patrol is a non-charter assignment. If you have a sheriff that's out on patrol in the Tenderloin, that is a non-chartered assignment.
I knew that, but is there any other non-charter assignments besides
Serving warrants, unlawful detainers, guarding city buildings.
Those.
So the only chartered assignment is jails?
I don't know.
Well, so the major non-charter assignments that we were focused on were deputies that are out patrolling. Is where we see. But I know that the sheriff, when he assisted with the crime problem, he took deputies from 4 different areas. So they didn't all just come from the jail out onto the street. They came from 4 different areas. But we had to look at, well, where, if you can't increase the number of deputies through hiring, where else are you going to get deputies? And so the only other place is to take the deputies that are in non-charter assignments and put them back into a chartered assignment. Then finally, I would say that there needs to be a wholesale investment in technology that would allow the sheriffs to better monitor the jail with less staff. We found that the cameras that are currently being used in the jail are there's just so much better technology out there that they could be utilizing. New cameras would increase their surveillance capabilities in the jail. They would offer wider angles, higher resolution, and there are cameras now where AI technology allows them to spot faster. It allows them to intervene faster on problems that are occurring with the AI technology. And then finally, I would say the cameras, the body-worn cameras would also be very, very helpful. And you also have parts of the jail that are not covered by the cameras. So I would say that an investment in technology would be very helpful and lessen the demand of manpower with that investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. And next we will go to the Public Defender's Office, Angela Chan.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Angela Chan. I'm an Assistant Chief Attorney at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. Thank you very much for holding this hearing today. The Public Defender's Office is very concerned about the rise in the jail population along with poor jail conditions. Oh, next slide, thank you. This includes frequent lockdowns and insufficient in-person programming and in-language services for detained San Franciscans, over 97% of whom are pretrial. So 97% of the people in our jails are pretrial. Our office's core mission is to fiercely defend our clients. We take lessons learned from direct representation in our criminal system to develop local and state policy priorities and to engage in community empowerment programs. We actually had a hand in getting this Sheriff Oversight Board in place because it was through our clients that identified gladiator fights that were happening in the jail in 2015 that led to the establishment of this Sheriff Oversight Board in partnership with Supervisor Walton and other members of the Board of Supervisors. Our office provides, and next slide please, our office provides legal representation to the most vulnerable people in San Francisco. We represent about 70% of the people in our local criminal system. All of our clients are low income, many are unhoused or have mental health conditions or substance use disorder. About 75% are people of color. Over half are Black, even though the Black population in San Francisco makes up about 6% of San Francisco. So there's a gross racial disparity in our jail population, our client population. The Sheriff's Department has failed, next slide please. I'm going to kind of go through some of the jail conditions that we're seeing here, and so I'll just start with kind of explaining some of the issues that we're seeing from our office, representing about 20,000 clients a year. The Sheriff's Department has failed to provide incarcerated people with consistent access to our attorneys, to their attorneys, our clients' attorneys, as well as to transportation to court, which has contributed to the increased jail population, since when you don't allow us to visit our clients to prepare for hearings and trials and don't transport our clients to court consistently, their cases can't be processed, and so you have more people staying in jail longer. That's an issue we've been working with the Sheriff's Department on to try to problem solve for the last several years, but it's a consistent issue. Legal visits are essential to our attorneys and our staff. This includes our paralegals, investigators, and social workers. And our clients have a constitutional and statutory right to speak with their attorneys. Unfortunately, we're finding that right not complied with frequently. And we engage in legal visits in 3 ways: through Zoom, which we really appreciate that there is that option, in person, and also via phone. With Zoom legal visits, we frequently see cancellations with no notice or explanation by the deputy handling the Zoom call. Our attorneys or staff will get on a Zoom call oftentimes on the weekends because they are working around the clock in many cases with heavy caseloads, and their client will just not be there. And there won't be an explanation as to why. And as an assistant chief attorney, I get that email on the weekend saying, I've been waiting for 45 minutes on a Saturday for my client to show, preparing for a Monday hearing. Nobody's here. I've been calling the jail. No one's answering. And that delays processing of these cases. We often experience bad Zoom quality where one or both parties can't hear each other and the call has to abruptly end. Regarding in-person visits, those are really important to us, because it's also a matter of establishing trust with our clients, to say that when we're going to show up on this day or that day, that we will actually be there. And when we aren't able to actually get access to our clients, that harms our relationships and also, again, delays processing of these cases. And what we've experienced is being blocked from doing legal visits due to lockdowns and short staffing, even though these are not valid legal reasons for denying us legal visits. They're not valid. We still have a right to those visits. Those are not exceptions to the statute on legal visits. Recently, a deputy in CJ3 walked into a legal visit room during a visit and told our staff to cut it short because of short staffing. Another pattern we've seen is the use of count time, like the regular counting of how many people are detained, to block our staff from entering, and what we call count creep, which is when we are denied access well before or even after official count time. Our social workers, until recently, were denied access to take photos of injuries of our clients, including injuries sustained from SFPD arrests. A key part of the work in the sheriff's office is to transport our clients to and from court. However, over the past several years, my office has had numerous experiences of deputies refusing to transport our clients to court and falsely claiming that our client didn't want to go to court. The sheriff's office keeps a log of these supposed refusals, but more work has to be done to make sure that these logs are actually completed and that they're accurate. And if there are certain deputies who are more likely to say that our clients are refusing than others. If clients are not able to go to court, again, this stalls their criminal proceedings and lengthens jail time. We've had multiple situations over the last year of people having their bail hearings delayed by weeks because of these failure to transport our clients' issues. Another issue what we want to highlight is client contact with family members. This is really important for everyone's mental health, and so that our clients feel supported. However, these visits were canceled during the pandemic, which took place over several years, and it's also taken several years for the visits to come slowly back, from twice a month in each jail until recently. Now they're a little more frequent. Families have found that the complicated and limited schedules for family visits to be hard to navigate and complain to our office about not being able to get to visitation appointments. The sheriff's office has been, they've been complaining about not being able to get appointments. The sheriff's office has been slowly working on increasing access, and we encourage them to continue and speed up these efforts. Programming in the jails was also shut down during COVID and has been very slow to return, particularly programming in Spanish and other languages. And as you are already aware, we've talked about this today already, there was a lawsuit filed against the sheriff's office for the lack of sunlight and outdoor time that people in the jails are experiencing. I did a tour of the jails last spring and was troubled by the total lack of access to something as basic as sunlight and fresh air, something that I think all of us appreciate but often also take for granted. This has a negative impact on mental health, can lead to long-term illnesses such as heart disease, depression, and hypertension, not to get access to sunlight and fresh air. And in October 2023, the judge in this lawsuit ordered the sheriff to provide at least 15 minutes of sunlight every day to people detained at the jail for 1 year or more. However, what I understand is there's issues with compliance. Most recently, there's a dispute about just removing a grate and having that kind of indirect indoor sunlight, whether or not that complies. I would say that certainly is concerning. We're also concerned about in-custody deaths. We've had several clients who've died allegedly by suicide, and we're concerned that these clients had mental health needs that were not being addressed in the jail. We're also concerned that at least 2 deputies who were fired for gross misconduct, including a deputy involved in the gladiator fights I mentioned earlier, have returned to the sheriff's department. Next slide, please. And so another issue we want to highlight is that we're concerned that with the deteriorating conditions in the jail, at the same time, the sheriff has chosen to deploy about 130 deputies to the Tenderloin as a part of local law enforcement's revival of the regressive and harmful war on drugs, which has included arresting people who are drug users, while at the same time, they're talking about insufficient staffing for the jail. The tactics have ramped up arrests and bookings, which has contributed to the jail population to now being over 1,200 people, which is my understanding the current is 100% of current capacity. That's from a low of about 700, not 800 actually. I was checking internally with our office, it was about 700 during the pandemic, so it's a dramatic increase in our jail population. And the drug arrests in San Francisco are now at the highest they've been in a decade, since 2014. In 2023, local law enforcement agencies made over 2,000 arrests for drug sales or drug use in the Tenderloin area alone. As the Chronicle reported recently, it's unclear how much this ramped up enforcement has cost the city in overtime, but we know about the cost in terms of lives. Sadly, I was just this morning in front of the medical examiner's office at a press conference with doctors who were talking about how we've now hit over 3,000 overdose deaths in San Francisco. That is significantly higher, actually double the number of people who died due to COVID, 1,318 people. And in that, with COVID, we listened to doctors and science and evidence-based practices. It seems like with the war on drugs, we're not doing that. And this photo here in this slide is a press conference we held. We called it No More Drug War, where we had doctors and healthcare professionals discussing best practices. So just sharing that up on the screen. In terms of those who are flash incarcerated at CJ1, the intake facility, for having substance use disorder, our clients have experienced excruciating pain from going through withdrawal with little to no medical support. Our staff have witnessed this when they've been able to meet with those clients who've been flash incarcerated, recently booked. And almost all of those individuals did not receive or refused treatment services. We're deeply concerned that this flash incarceration is really harassment of our clients, and it's not a sincere effort to connect them to low entry, low barrier treatment services that are culturally competent and language accessible. Next slide, please. With the dramatic increase in our jail population and also the decrease in diversion, particularly under this district attorney's administration, that means we have more people in our jails with substance use disorder, or more people with mental health conditions who should really be receiving treatment instead of being in a cage. And our attorneys have much higher caseloads as a result. Currently, our felony attorneys average about 70 cases per attorney, with some attorneys having as much as 100 cases. Our misdemeanor attorneys average about 120 cases per attorney. Just to give you a point of comparison, in 2020, the average caseload for our felony attorneys was 50. And so at our office, we're really feeling the brunt of this really revival of mass incarceration in San Francisco that we've undergone the last few years. Next slide, please. Our budget at our office is about $51 million. The district attorney's budget is $81 million. Our budget's about 6 times less than the sheriff's department, 13 times less than the police department. We're noting that because when we talk about funding and the need for more money, I have to say our office is not particularly sympathetic to that, since we get so much less to do so much work in terms of advocating for our clients. We really urge the sheriff's department to think about how you prioritize your existing budget, which is quite large by comparison to ours. And our overall recommendation is to address the root causes of crime and the need for community safety, rather than pouring more money into our over $1 billion that we spend on law enforcement. What we've seen from working with our clients is that incarceration destabilizes communities. It drains resources for more effective community solutions. It disproportionately harms Black and brown communities. And taxpayer funds would be better spent on long-term investments to serve our underserved communities, provide mental health and substance use treatment that is in language and that's culturally competent, and to provide job training and educational opportunities that are really proven solutions and really common sense solutions, rather than packing our jails, which we're hearing from today not only harms the people who are incarcerated, but harms the deputies who are working in our jails. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ms. Chan, now we'll go back to Supervisor Walton, and I know that there are members of the Board of Supervisors who have questions before we open this up for public comment. Supervisor Walton.
Thank you, President Peskin. And I got several questions, but I'm ask a few because I got a feeling some of my colleagues will address some of my concerns. But if I could get Sheriff Miyamoto back up, please. And thank you all for the presentation. I think one of the things that is most helpful is that folks provided some solutions, and that's an opportunity, I think, for us to work together to improve the situation for the deputies and people in custody. A lot of folks touched on the point that now we're seeing a new type of inmate where there's more language issues. It looks like more mental health concerns, and even in some cases more substance abuse concerns. What do you have in place right now to address the needs of those people in custody? What support do the deputies have? What do they have the ability to do to be able to work with that population?
I think in regards to your question, you're referring to both our incarcerated population and our staff. I'll address the staff one first in terms of what tools they have. We have crisis intervention techniques training that we've provided for our staff for some time now. We also have what we call our behavioral health assistance team, which is a partnership with healthcare workers, behavioral health workers, and our deputies who have been identified, given additional training, and provide a system of support, not just reaching out to individuals in our custody at times when they're in crisis, but also just checking up on them on a regular basis. And we found success in that program at County Jail 3. We do have limited resources to expand on that program, which is one of the reasons why today we stand before you recognizing that there's an issue. And as you've heard from everyone, although we may defer on some of the reference points and descriptions, I think you hear that we are all on the same page in regards to investments into our justice system for those incarcerated, which would lead to some improvements. So our staff is receiving that kind of training, and we've provided it absent additional funding for that. In regards to the inmates and the health and care of the inmates themselves, our partnership with the Department of Public Health, our jail behavioral health specialists that are a part of our team, we have very strong individuals, both at County Jail 2 and County Jail 3, who provide us constant care, but the problem is we're limited. One of the biggest issues that we have with the staffing and funding for our partners in the Department of Public Health, we don't get 24-hour mental health coverage, and we're a 24-hour care facility. We have to deal with people who are up at all hours of the night, who are in crisis at different times of the night other than business hours, and what we have asked for in partnership with DPH in the past has been funding and additional staff to help provide 24-hour behavioral health specialists so that we can deal with people at their time of crisis. In addition to that, with the programs that we have some references in the materials to some of those programs. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I do know that one of the things that we encourage is partnerships that working on people that are coming out. So it's not so much just having people in place and incarcerated for longer periods of time. We have long-term care structures in place for that. We're looking towards the people who, I believe Angela from the Public Defender's Office referenced, individuals who don't get that care when they come back out. And that's what we look to in terms of reentry services, in terms of discharge planning for their health needs. That's an important component that we're lacking in right now and that we ask for more support on.
What about language capacity?
The language issues that we have are not as pronounced with our behavioral health individuals. They're pronounced with more recently incarcerated. The disruption of the drug trade, sales, and use has led to an increase in some individuals who have language access needs. We have translation services actually on our tablets. I didn't mention that one of the things that we've used to try to make things better for individuals that are incarcerated is our tablet program. I think I have over 990 tablets that are issued out. That was in anticipation of having a population of about that number. We're working to get additional tablets. We have translation services on those tablets, which has been extremely helpful for language access issues. We work to having more individuals that can speak directly. We've been talking to the Jail Justice Coalition as late as, I think I was on the phone with them yesterday when this has come up. So it's an ongoing issue and need for us. We have deputies who are identified as translators, but only about 17 that are actually currently assigned to County Jail 3, about 30-something total in our custody operations division. So we're looking to getting more individuals that have that skill set as well. And then most recently, our prisoner legal services team has hired on somebody who is Spanish speaking. I've actually done it myself, Supervisor, with my limited speaking skills. When we issued a video to explain to our population exactly why there was a lockdown and to explain to them what happened during that time, I issued message videos out both in English and I spoke Spanish in another one in order to make sure that our population was reassured about the things that were going on and making sure they were part of the communication out on what we were doing and what we were trying to accomplish.
Well, I know it's obvious that more support is needed and there are gaps in terms of staffing. Can you explain who authorizes the non-chartered positions or the non-chartered focus?
I appreciate that you're asking that because I wanted the opportunity to explain this for those that don't understand completely. It's not just the jails that our deputies work in. The city charter identifies not just the jails, the courts, the civil process. You referenced the service of civil papers and warrants, court orders. Ultimately, I decide where our people go. The deployment that we're talking about in question that was brought up also by the Public Defender's Office is a number of deputies, and the total number of individuals out at any given time is one squad, 8 total individuals, 2 of whom are already assigned to the Field Operations Division in funded FTEs for that task. The additional 6 are pulled from the 4 different divisions, as Inspector General Wiley mentioned, not just from the jail. Even if we were to take all our deputies off the street and put them back into their assignments, they wouldn't be going back to the jails. They'd be going to other assignments as well. That decision was absolutely mine to make sure that we assisted the police department's efforts in disrupting the drug trade. The individuals that have gone out, Supervisor, are also members of our emergency services unit. So they're not just deputies that are going out there, but deputies that have additional skill sets.
So no point in time do we have folks who worked in the jails out on those assignments?
Oh, no, we absolutely do have times when we do deploy or when we did deploy individuals assigned to the jails because they're a part of our pool. But we didn't pull exclusively from the jails. And our current phasing out of the 2-week deployment and going into a 2-month deployment where we're going to have individuals assigned for a certain specific period of time, the emphasis in partnership with the Controller's Office, who has also been concerned about our overtime expenditures in that area, we've made efforts to make sure that the individuals would not require backfill overtime to have somebody replace their assignment. So they're being identified not just by being ESU members, but also by where they are currently working.
And just for my education, how many deputies or staff are in uncharted patrol positions or however it's termed at any given time or any given day?
So the rest of the composition of our field operations division is not just based on what you have called non-charter assignments, but we also—
they could be
they're
working at
also—
the front of City Hall.
Exactly.
for
City
example.
Hall is a perfect example of where we have deputies assigned that would be considered a non-charter assignment under that definition. However, obviously, we have a job and a duty and an obligation here that's funded to be present here. Where we see deputies that are in our Sheriff's Patrol Unit, the deputies that do perform law enforcement functions and answer calls for service, we have a contract with the Department of Public Health. That's a large chunk of our staff that are out there, not just patrolling the campuses, but also the 57, 58 clinics that there are throughout the city as well. That would be an example of where you would see more deputies out on patrol. We have deputies that are in contracted fixed post assignments as well. The Department of Emergency Management has our staff on hand there, as do MTA building and the public library.
Thank you, Sheriff. President Peskin, I will yield to colleagues.
Thank you, Supervisor Walton. Sheriff Miyamoto, just relative to if you can characterize, as we've all seen, a now 36% increase in the jail population in a relatively short period of time, now in excess of a census of 1,200 folks. And there was statements by some of the individuals who testified that some of that increased population are individuals who have been charged with misdemeanors for drug use, as opposed to some of that increased population being individuals charged with drugs for sale or distribution. Do you have a breakdown of what that is? I mean, clearly we are hearing that some of that population is in detox while in the facility. Do you know what the numbers are?
I don't have the exact numbers on that information. Some of it is HIPAA protected, so we can't get an exact number from DPH on who is under treatment for withdrawal management or substance use disorder issues. We do understand, when you look at I think in the presentation there was a chart that reflected behavioral health identified individuals. That's both for psychiatric disorders and substance use disorder. So that would be contained in that number. And that would be, I think on the chart it reflected about 100 or so out of the 700 that are at County 3, and then another, I don't know what the other number was,
So
but
at
I can get
CJ
that information to you from the slide count.
Yeah, these are obviously individuals in need of help. It is unclear to me that the best and most cost-effective place to put drug users is in the jail, which is exacerbating the overcrowding problems, leading to assaults of deputies. This makes me wonder whether systemically, societally, as a government, we should be getting those folks into treatment for drug use offenses rather than as opposed to drug dealers. That's the first question. The second question is, there would be some bit of irony if it were sheriff's deputies on patrol who were arresting people for drug use that were leading to sheriff's deputies being assaulted in overcrowded positions. And I've never been clear, as we have undertaken in a more serious way going after the open-air drug dealing in and around mid-market and the Tenderloin, how it evolved that the sheriff's office, which outside of the contract with DPH for patrol services hasn't historically had an on-the-street patrol presence, how that came to be.
I could speak to both questions you asked. First, to the population question. One thing I would like to point out is that we are talking about subsets of our population. So those that have substance use disorder or that have some issues related to drug usage aren't the individuals that are attacking or assaulting our staff. So there would not be a correlation there. There's more behavioral health issues and respect issues in regards to those assaults. When you talk about the prior iterations of our population, we have, in my career, have had treatment on demand. We've had very robust services in the jail. Our Roads to Recovery program was an award-winning program that we had directly related to people who were using drugs. To give you an idea of what has evolved over the years in the course of my career with the Sheriff's Office, our original No Violence Alliance initiative, which assisted people with reentry services that had violence-based charges, eventually evolved into including people with drug charges and drug problems and issues, to the point where now the majority of the people in our NOVA program are drug-related as opposed to violence-related. And that was a shift because our system shifted people with drug dependency and issues out of custody and into the community. Now we're seeing that come back. Our efforts are a part of that with DMAC. The decision to put people out there was mine, as I mentioned to Supervisor Walton. It also provides our staff with an opportunity. I will say this anecdotally. Our staff, because of our work in the custodial setting, have, in my experience, had a better rapport and relationship with individuals that are justice involved, with individuals that we see out on the street that end up in jail. We have a better rapport because we live with them every day when they're in custody. And it creates a relationship that is more helpful when we have deputies out on the street, whether it's in our chartered duty responsibilities or whether it's in specifically focused operations and missions. There is a difference in how we can interact with individuals out on the street. And I'm very proud of seeing that in my staff. I've experienced it firsthand as well as seeing it with my staff. I think that has led to us not really ending up arresting people that we've placed in jail, but working more on trying to get people the help they need. And injuries occur outside of the jail too. Just last night, I had a sergeant injure his ankle and will now be out with ligament damage while out on the street trying to assist with somebody who is in crisis at the public library. So happens out on the street just as much as it happens inside the jail.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work of your deputies. I guess insofar as the primary duty in San Francisco County of the sheriff is the jails, I guess it is occurring to me, and maybe it is self-evident, that while the assaults on deputies may not be perpetrated by the drug user population that is incarcerated, but is being done by other individuals, nonetheless, there are two factors that we are seeing that all four individuals who've testified from the Public Defender's Office, Inspector General's Office, the unit of labor known as the Deputy Sheriff's Association, as well as yourself, is an increase in population and a staffing shortage, right? So, I mean, it becomes a cauldron, it becomes a pressure cooker, and it just seems to me, far be it from me to tell you how to do your job, that if you have choices you can make in the field, making those choices with as robust a jail staffing regimen while you're working to deal with a hiring backlog seems like the required, difficult choice.
I appreciate that, and you're absolutely right. There are difficult choices. One of the things that I mentioned in my presentation, Mr. President, is we'd like to see future partnerships with everyone in regards to recruiting and hiring. One of our challenges would be if we were to take every single deputy, including those here at City Hall, everyone, and place them back in charter. We'd have that staffing, but then we would have a workforce that is in this environment, that is staffed up but is still in the same environment, that don't have opportunities to work in other places. That's why we have what we call a satellite system where people can rotate into other places. The traumas that we see in the incarceration environment every day are things that I don't want to see my staff doing for 25, 30 years. I'd like to see them with more opportunities to do other things related to law enforcement and public safety, rather than just focusing on the jails. I know we have a crisis right now, and I've said this before, that I believe that we are capable of dealing with this. I absolutely understand that we need to get more people, and I am frustrated, just as everyone else is here, that we have limitations on that, whether they're budgetary, whether they're restrictions placed on me by the Controller's Office to hire people. I've asked for those recs to be filled numerous times. We have people in backgrounds, we have files, we just can't hire them fast enough.
Thank you, Mr. Sheriff. Supervisor Ronan.
Thank you. I am extremely frustrated. This is an incredibly grave situation that was entirely foreseeable. Entirely foreseeable. Many of us called it. The minute that this new revived war on drugs was announced by the mayor's office with your participation, we knew that we had a workforce crisis in the sheriff's office. We've known this for so long, not just the sheriff's office, but in the police department as well. We knew that this effort to arrest not only dealers but drug users was going to lead to a much larger jail population of very sick people, people that were addicted to drugs and needed medical intervention, and people with severe mental health issues, which usually come together. There's very few individuals in San Francisco, and you can talk to any professional in this area and they will tell you this, that is just a drug addict or just mentally ill. 90% of people have a dual diagnosis because the mental illness led them to self-medicate and become drug addicts, or the constant drug use and homelessness led to trauma that made the person mentally ill. We knew that jail health services couldn't handle the level of sickness that people are facing in the jails. I've talked to the directors of jail health when Supervisor Dorsey wanted to move money from treatment into jail health. I made this point very forcefully then, that they not only can't provide the treatment in that setting because it is not the best place to treat mentally ill or addicted individuals, but they have a workforce crisis. They cannot hire, jail health services cannot hire doctors and nurses. Why? Because doctors and nurses and medical professionals do not want to treat addicts in jail. They think it is wrong, they think it doesn't work, and they find it incredibly dangerous for individuals that are detoxing under improper circumstances. And then we knew we had a severe budget crisis coming, so that we weren't going to be able to fix these workforce shortages. So my number one question is, what was the plan? What was the plan? When you all sat together and decided that you're going to go, you and the district attorney and the mayor's office and the police department. In fact, I'm very frustrated there's no representative here from the mayor's office, because I have a lot of questions for the mayor's office after this hearing. But what was the plan? Because all of this was foreseeable. None of these conditions are new. So since you're the only one here, I don't see the police chief, I don't see the DA, I don't see the mayor's office. You are the only one to answer the question that was involved in that planning. What was the plan? We knew, this is the inevitable result of those circumstances. So can you tell me what was discussed and what was planned at that point?
I can give you my perspective, Supervisor Ronan, and I'd be happy to share that in regards to what the overarching plan was. The overarching plan was to create a multi-pronged approach to a problem that we all see, or we all saw out on the street. Part of what I contributed to the discussions were requests for a substance use disorder withdrawal management location, something where we could partner with the Department of Public Health to create a setting that was not a jail, that was not a part of the criminal justice system, but was part of the healthcare system. And the only way I could describe this to you would be to say there was a segment of the troubled population who weren't making choices, were committing criminal acts, but we ourselves, and I always tell people, it's an easier job for myself and my staff when there's less people in jail. So our intention, and my personal intention as the sheriff of San Francisco, wasn't to just put people in jail. It was to get people to help. The idea of withdrawal management location, and we toyed with the idea in different places. The cops, the police department, were looking for what they called a sobering center. We've had that in the past, where we had these intermediary steps where we could place people, not putting them in jail, but with a focus on harm reduction. As opposed to that, we've gotten rid of those options. My personal intention as the sheriff was to have an option available other than jail and other than harm reduction, and have that meet in the middle moment for people where they can go someplace, still have, for lack of a better term, a controlled environment so that they can
I just
detox.
stop you for 1 minute? Because this isn't on you. I mean, I was upset that you're sending those 6 to 8 deputies a day on this ridiculous endeavor that isn't working, right? That's my little beef with you. But your part of it is so small, right? This is a complete lack of leadership on the part of the mayor's office, on the part of the district attorney, and a part on the police department. They did not see through the consequences of the action and have a plan to address those issues. So what's happening now? Our city employees' lives are on the line. People who are being held in custody, who are very sick, their lives are on the line. What's the longest period that a lockdown has happened?
You mean in the recent ones, or you mean in general? So I believe that in reference to the timeline, the first lockdown was from April 12th to the 18th or thereabouts. So 6
for
days
6
total.
days, people could not leave their cells for a second?
Individuals still were let out. We didn't let everyone out at the same time, so let me put it that way.
Okay.
And although it was delayed, people still had access to their counsel. We weren't shutting down where nobody could come out for anything at all.
Well, that's not what I mean.
And there's also, I understand, and although it may be messaged differently, people were still allowed access. There are delays that are caused by the lockdown, as was mentioned, I think, earlier, but we're very aware of people's constitutional rights. In fact, my whole job, when you talk about taking care of people in jail, when you talk about our budgets and why one budget is smaller or larger than the other, we're tasked with taking care of the people and taking away their rights. And that is something that we absolutely take into consideration when we have these lockdowns.
I am just angry because we get these celebration press releases on a regular basis from the mayor's office. We have arrested 150 people in the Tenderloin. But what isn't in those press releases, and they're going to an overcrowded jail that they're going to spend a majority of their time in lockdown and going to beat the crap out of our city employees. That's missing from the press releases. This is a very, very serious crisis. You are not staffing the courts sufficiently so that people are not getting their constitutional rights to a speedy trial. Our public defenders have hundreds of cases and can't properly provide the proper defense. People are not getting better. They're just cycling back onto the streets anyway after this whole dangerous situation that we put them in the jails to begin with. And we don't see, I don't see any leadership. Where is the mayor's office? Usually we have a representative from the mayor's office. President Peskin, can we call the mayor's office and ask for a representative?
We shall forthwith.
Because I think that this is an issue that needs immediate attention. We need some actual answers. We have heard some suggestions from all of you today that are good suggestions, but there's nobody here to say whether or not those suggestions are going to take place. And meanwhile, your cadets' lives are at risk in the jails right now as we speak. Like, this is a crisis, and there is not a single person from the mayor's office here to say what we're going to do about it. What's going on with your budget discussions with the mayor? You explained what you need, your 3 points, in order to create a semi-safer situation. It's not going to be much safer, it sounds like, given your points. But what are your budget discussions with the mayor? Are you being asked to cut your budget even further?
Yes, in response to that, we've all been asked as department heads to cut 10%. I've said literally publicly as late as yesterday that we're not able to cut anymore right now with our current budget. I have an obligation to my staff, to the individuals that we are responsible for. I will say this also, that jails are a dangerous place no matter how much we invest into them, because we are dealing with individuals who are in crisis. So the danger is one reason why we have sworn individuals working there, and the deputies that are working with the healthcare staff. One of our biggest challenges is making sure that there's always somebody there. That leads to delays.
Your deputies that are exhausted, overworked, working absurd amounts of mandatory overtime, not voluntary overtime, mandatory violent overtime, and that are subject to attack by the inmates. I'm glad someone's here from the mayor's office. This is really, really serious and a real outrage and completely foreseeable. And so I would love to hear from the mayor's representative of the board, Tom Paulino. What's the plan to address this?
Apologies for my absence, Supervisor. Could you repeat the question?
Okay, let me repeat everything once again. Everything that is happening today in the jails, which is a very serious situation. Deputies are getting attacked. There are injuries. They are woefully understaffed. They are working dozens and dozens, every week and every month, more mandatory overtime hours. The inmates are mentally ill, detoxing without proper medical treatment, complete change in population, that even inmates that are used to being in our local jails are not only saying that it's a completely new environment in the jails like they've never seen before. The quote you didn't add to your PowerPoint, Sheriff, was the guy who said, "I'd rather be in prison than jail because the conditions in San Francisco are so bad. Send me to Rikers, send me to San Quentin, where the most hardened criminals and the worst conditions are. They want to go to prison rather than stay in San Francisco jails." All of this was foreseeable. This was foreseeable when the mayor, the police chief, the DA, and the sheriff, although to a much or lesser extent, I will say, launched War on Drugs Point 2, where they said, we're going to go to the Tenderloin, we're going to go to the Mission, and we're going to arrest not only dealers, but we're going to arrest users as well, and we're going to throw them in jail, even though we don't have proper medical services, because another condition we knew about was that jailhouse services isn't prepared to handle the level of detox that's happening in the jails right now. They are not able to handle it, not only because jail is not a place to handle detox and mental illness at the levels that they're doing so in jail right now, but they can't hire the staff that they need. Why can't they hire the staff? Because nobody wants to work in the jail under these conditions when they're a medical professional that said you shouldn't treat individuals in jail in this way. I'm not going to go work there. That would be against my Hippocratic oath. We knew that the budget crisis that we're facing right now was coming. And yet, every so often, I'm still getting press releases from the mayor's office saying, let's celebrate. We arrested 150 people, drug users in the Tenderloin. Celebrate, celebrate. What those press releases don't say is when we're putting them in overcrowded jails that are understaffed, both medically and by deputies, we're putting deputies' lives at risk, we're putting these inmates' lives at risk, and there's a complete chaos happening in our jails. So my question for you is, what is the plan to deal with this situation?
Thank you for the question, Supervisor. I admittedly do not have a direct answer to your question. I am not fully briefed on this particular subject matter. I will be direct and honest.
Is there anyone from your office that can come and say a word to this? I mean, you have our elected sheriff, our public defender's office, our sheriff inspector general, and our sheriff union head coming to the Board of Supervisors saying we are in complete crisis. The conditions in our jail are dangerous, so much so that our inmates are saying, we like the sheriff's deputies. They're the nicest they've ever been to us. They're kind people. We're scared for their safety. You've got the inmates scared for the safety of the deputies, and you have no one from the mayor's office here to say, that's briefed to say, Mr. Sheriff, Mr. Head of the Union, Public Defender's Office, Inspector General, here's our plan to address the issue? This is outrageous. This is outrageous. And what makes it even more outrageous is many of us on this Board of Supervisors called it. We said, this is going to be the outcome of the War on Drugs Point 2. You do not have a plan in place to deal with arresting this amount of sick individuals. We can agree or disagree whether that's a good idea. I completely disagree. I think it's a horrible idea. But at the time, our point was, you don't even have a plan in place. And what has been proven today is indeed, there was no plan in place. We are in complete crisis, and there is not a single person here from the mayor's office to say how now we're going to address this crisis, and the complete lack of safety of our own city employees. It's outrageous, and I'll just end there.
Supervisor Mandelman.
Thank you, President Peskin. I agree with some of the things that my colleague said, but not all. And I think I'm going to get to the point of agreement. But on the points of disagreement, I believe that where San Francisco had arrived in, say, 2020 to 2022 in terms of drug dealing and use in our public spaces was completely and 100% intolerable. And I think it is still intolerable, but it is better. And I think that it is better in part because of efforts of the people who my colleague thinks were so wrong. But I do think that the increased enforcement efforts by the San Francisco Police Department, the increased prosecution by the District Attorney's Office, and the work of your department have helped to take back some of our sidewalks, some of our plazas, and to make some public areas safer. Now, and the notion that returning to 2014 levels of drug enforcement takes us to a war on drugs 2.0 strikes me as patently ridiculous. It is beginning to enforce some of the rules around how we use our public spaces. And although I think there's a ton we can do around treatment and a ton we can do about giving people other opportunities, I think that at some point, and I believe, and one of the things I've learned from my colleague, Supervisor Dorsey, is that most cities that have successfully addressed open-air drug scenes have done it with a combination of treatment and repression. And the repression piece is important, and we need law enforcement for the repression piece. And you've been part of that, and I'm grateful to you for that. Now, that being said, before we get to that being said, I want to talk a little bit about this drug user arrest conversation, because I am under the impression that this is a very small program where we are bringing a relatively small number of folks into jail health, and they are back out very quickly. And that if you are having a rise in population and challenges around the maintenance of your facilities, it is not because of a handful of people coming down or coming down off of a high. But am I wrong about that? Am I missing what's going on? Have we amped this program up much more than I'm aware of, and are we bringing in lots and lots of users every day, and that's a significant burden on your department?
I believe in response to that, Supervisor, the previous slide deck indicated that from jail health numbers, we have a rapid turnover of our population at 76% of those that are in need for these kinds of cares and services actually are released within 7 days. And that's why I brought up previously that part of our challenge is to make sure that we're more robust in the reentry services. And
But I think the people who are being released within 7 days are like being arrested for all sorts of stuff. The issue that we're talking about is this particular program where for a small, I thought it was a pretty small number of people who are not committing other crimes. They are creating a challenge on the sidewalk because of their intoxication, their state. We do not have, although we ought to, it would be great to have a robust public health response that would allow for involuntary detention for a period of time run entirely by DPH and outside of the jails. But we don't have that. And so you and your jails have stepped in as the place for people to come down. But I don't think they're staying there for 7 days. I think they're staying there for a day or less. And I think it's a really small number. So I think you do have tremendous churn, and I think you have churn of people who are using substances and have mental illnesses, and all that is true. But it's not this program that is looking at what happens when you happen to use your jail as the place where we bring down people because they were publicly intoxicated. Am I wrong?
I think yes. So
you think I am wrong? Okay, well that's fine.
No. I want to say yes as to what you're stating, which is that it's a smaller percentage of individuals that are staying for longer periods of time that need that help. You're absolutely right about that. Okay. But similar to what President Peskin had requested earlier regarding data on that, I could work with our jail health services people and make sure that we get that information, at least some semblance of that information back to you.
Great.
For both of your questions.
And just looking at the numbers, it's 28% are misdemeanors.
28% of what's the denominator?
Yeah, it doesn't say what misdemeanors they are, but.
Okay.
Yeah, but overwhelmingly most drug use and drug sale charges are misdemeanors, yes.
Right, but those could be drug sales. I mean, yes. That could well be the drug sales. Okay. Or, possession for, I mean, I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I don't know.
Can I just say one thing? Isn't it true? I mean, I look at your jail census numbers every single day, and they've been going steadily up.
Yes.
And they seem to correspond with the with the initiation of this new strategy.
But there were, taking back my time, there were a million things going on that would have been driving up the numbers of people being held for long. I mean, a new district attorney who is charging things, who is a whole comprehensive strategy around not just the use. I mean, the use in its minor is minor. The sale and the sort of breaking up of drug scenes and dealers was, I think, driving a lot of that. But I'm going to go up to the point where I agree with. Can I agree with my colleague from District 9? The point where I'm going to agree is that, I mean, I think my colleague does not believe that we should have the numbers where they are. I'm not sure that, I think that the activities that we are engaged in, which I largely support, make it inevitable that we're going to be detaining more people. But if we are detaining more people, I think you agree, and I know you carry your obligation to this population of folks that you are responsible for taking care of, and you take that seriously. But one of the things that we had prior to the pandemic was a robust set of programs that had been built up over decades, innovative approaches to the relationship of the deputies and the folks in the jails, like. I mean, I think we had pioneered the sort of having the deputies, right in there and interacting with the folks who are being held in the jails, and not having that barrier, and not treating, And one of the things that was so offensive about the jail at 850 Bryant was it was, kept that kind of like prisoners behind the walls with the, and that's not what you're trying to do in San Bruno. And there is this work that was done to come up with a more humane approach to incarceration, and also having classes and programming. And you've hinted a little bit at the changes that have happened on the public health side and the availability of treatment. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. But I also know from my visit in the last few months that, like, the programming that was happening before the pandemic, like, that hallway is closed, and it's closed because there are not the deputies available to keep the hallway open, where people would be taking their classes, getting their GEDs, doing whatever having an anger management class, reading a book, whatever the thing is that might make that time in jail a little more useful and make people a little more likely to be successful when they leave. And I think the fact that we aren't prioritizing that and don't really have a plan to get back to where we were, in the pre-pandemic era is, to me, as troubling as the lockdown. The lockdowns are terrible, and the harm that's being, the threat to our workforce is terrible, and the ways in which that is then going to change the interactions between prisoners and deputies is also disturbing. But I really do think it's critical, and I do think it is job one for the Sheriff's Department to be able to manage and run a rehabilitative jail. And I don't know if that requires pulling you out of we don't pull you out, you decide. But I don't know if that requires you abandoning your contribution, sorry, PD and mayor and DA, we got to tend to the jails. But it seems like your first job is to be able to have a safe rehabilitative jail, and you don't have the staff to do it now. And I guess where I think I am in agreement with my colleague is like that. Seems like that should absolutely be the top priority for the mayor's office as well, for the budgetary investments that we make, for getting you the technology that you would need to free up every staffer, and then getting you as much as we can. We spend a lot of time talking about the SFPD staffing shortage and demanding to know how they're going to address that. But this staffing shortage is equally serious because we are taking more people off of the streets. We are responsible for them, and if we want that to have any kind of positive impact going forward, we have to be using that time where they're detained, as well as we can. And I'm really concerned that we're really, really not. I don't know if you want to respond to any of that.
I can speak to the rehabilitative program services. We actually have staff on hand, our rehabilitative services coordinators, who are sheriff's office staff that are tasked with managing the CBOs that come in to provide programs and services. Unfortunately, during lockdowns and during staffing shortages, that's the very first thing that is limited. We still, despite the staffing shortages, have the opportunity to open things. Like right now, we're in partnership with City College, and they're providing classes 3 times a week in that same quarter that you mentioned. But the educational piece is different from the programmatic piece. And the programmatic piece is a challenge for us now. 1, because our staff are overworked. 2, we can't put the cohorts together like we used to be able to. One of our successes has been with the annex, with the housing units in the annex that are a dormitory setting. Both staff and inmates that are there find that to be a more calming environment, and something, ironically, that we're moving back to, because County Jail 7 was the original iteration of those dorms. That was our first direct supervision facility that you mentioned, where we had that. So we're going back to what we used to do very well in those 2 instances. Unfortunately, brought on by the circumstances that were referenced by you and Supervisor Ronan, but we've still done this before and we know how to do it, and we're just getting back into doing that. The support that we need, as I've mentioned earlier, really comes down to making sure that we recognize that when we do the things that we're doing right now for public safety on the street, regardless of who makes those decisions, the jails and the criminal justice system have to be considered a part of one of the prongs of that.
Supervisor Dorsey.
Thank you, President Peskin. Thank you to my colleague for having this hearing. I definitely think it's worth having a larger policy discussion about what we can do to better serve those who are being arrested for public drug use and whether that's something we should be doing. One point I would make is that many of the people who, as I understand it, many of the people who are struggling with situations where they're detoxing in jail aren't solely there because they've been arrested for public drug use. That in many cases it's because of any number of violent crimes or property crimes in which they may be acting out in their addictions. I don't know if you have a percentage of sort of a ballpark percentage of how many people who are coming into the jail for another crime, a violent crime or property crime or anything that they've been arrested for, are doing so because they're acting out in their addiction?
We don't have exact numbers, but I do know that question actually came up at our Safety and Justice Challenge Subcommittee. Our analyst that provides the data on the population was looking into trying to figure out how to divide that out in terms of the charges and the behaviors. Okay. But it is a very challenging process because it's very subjective, and it's hard to keep track, especially now that we have 1,200 people as opposed to 800.
I guess even if we were to settle the debate as a matter of public policy, I think we still would be faced with a threshold problem that this hearing is focused on, and that's that we don't have enough staff to do what we're asking staff to do. And it occurred to me that many of the issues raised today are identical to issues that are playing out and recently played out at a hearing that Supervisor Stephanie led at the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee for the Police Department, and that's just the hiring pipeline. So there's 2 things on that. One, I wanted to ask, would your department, and maybe this is for the Deputy Sheriff's Association as well, would your department be open to working with the Department of Human Resources if we were to have a DHR-led kind of multi-departmental push on public safety hiring, given that we are facing very similar problems with police, with sheriffs, with 911 operators, EMTs, and others, and maybe even to the extent where someone is not a fit in one of those capacities, may be a fit for another? Might it benefit the city to either have a consolidated effort or work order all of this work, all of the backgrounds, everything, to DHR and let them lead it for everybody?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I would say the partnership idea is something that I've actually broached with both Chief Nicholson and Chief Scott regarding combining our efforts, and Mary Ellen, Director of DEM, combining our recruitment efforts for overarching public safety push. That was an organic idea amongst us as leaders in public safety. DHR's involvement would be welcome, but again, I think there's a component of recruiting where you want to have members of the agency be a part of that, because by telling the story, whether it's publicly here like this or on social media or in some sort of ad campaign, ultimately where we get the most results for hiring, where we get the most results for recruiting people into the hiring process has been the one-on-one, whether it's family, friends, loved ones, whether it's our interactions with people out in the community or focused or targeted at educational institutions, job fairs, things like that. Having someone from each department involved in that recruiting is ultimately what really gets people interested in the job itself. That's why I mentioned actually earlier in my commentary that we look forward to kind of having some sort of collaborative effort, whether it's between us and the union. You know, when we talk about negative things publicly, it only hinders our recruitment efforts to get people interested in doing the job. I think we are in crisis in regards to what we're going to do as policymakers right now. That's why we're standing here before you, and that's why we're all talking about this. But we also want to make sure that we ensure people that there's a job there in the jails that is a calling for people to help other people. And that's what I want to emphasize when we talk about recruiting.
Then the other thing you mentioned, and I think Ken Lamba mentioned it as well, and I think after I ask this, I'm going to ask him to answer the same two questions. I think you both made reference to Prop F employees or 960s. Those are people who are retired and under, I forget what year that was passed, but it enables retired city employees to come back, and they're limited to how many, I think it's 120 days and 960 hours. Are you finding that among your sort of, the 960 Prop F folks who are coming back to help, are they reaching the limits? If we were to somehow go back and expand that and ask voters perhaps let's see if we can get more work out of people for our retirees. It occurs to me that this, by the way, I know this is like the city departments, but we're in a labor market issue where we have reached now the point of half the baby boom has retired. And that's why there's staffing challenges in the public and private sectors, and this may be something sort of long-term that we may need to think about. Would 960s, if we were to bump that up to more hours or more days that they could work, would that be helpful, or would it not matter based on what you're seeing?
I will say, based on personal experience and knowledge of the individuals that are in our program, there are some who would be very open to having additional hours. I would say also that right now, our current program, we have 44 participants with an under 21 that we're waiting to be approved so that we can bring them on as well. It is a segment of our workforce that is very helpful in us, staffing up in terms of getting people. They're working in positions now that they hadn't worked in prior. We have individuals working in the courts, which absolutely help us with our staffing. I think Supervisor Ronan mentioned, we're not just talking about the jails where we're short, but we're also short in the courts, and that affects our ability to support the judges in the system. So having individuals doing that job is very helpful to us. We have people with the skill set, the training, and the experience to do so. So I'd be absolutely open. The jobs, though, would be subject to talking with President Lamba and the collective bargaining unit, because we're also talking about positions in our department that would be augmented by Prop Fs.
Through the chair, would it be okay to ask President Lamba just to also address? I'd just be interested to hear if you would be open to something. I really appreciate, by the way, in your presentation, solutions. And I think there's never, I'll never complain about bringing us solutions to consider.
Right on, thank you.
Because I think that's what we have hearings for. On the issue of a coordinated public safety thing that our Department of Human Resources would marshal resources and try to maximize the benefit from all of our public safety agencies, would the DSA be interested in something like that?
I think it would be helpful, but we also have bigger problems. Like the initial solution that we presented, cutting the first step in pay to attract more people. I think that would draw in more applicants, and we would get a bigger eligibility list, and that was done for the police department, and it's successful. And I think, working together jointly is good. I think for, not only for us, but for the police department, I think, like I was saying, nationally, we have a national marketplace, and we should be targeting, not only Bay Area, but nationally, and we're lacking in that. And, for the sheriff's office, I think that is a lack of funding, and I think that it is upon the sheriff to advocate for that funding from the mayor. And if that's not working, then he should be coming to you all and advocating with you all to help him to be successful at that. And if that doesn't work, he should be getting the public behind him to get that advocacy and that pressure to get that done. So partially it's funding for recruiting and advertising. And then with that, I don't see San Francisco Sheriff's or Police Department really having a fast track hiring process for out of state. This has been done in LA, it's been done in Washington and other states. There's a lot of ways to really attract more people, and there's some systems that aren't in place here that I don't really see a lot of effort trying to do that. I think we can close the gap in our negative staffing, for us and for the police if it was more of a national campaign. You want me to move on to your Prop
Yeah,
F?
I'd be interested to get your take on the provision in the charter that allows for retirees to come back. I think it's Charter Section A8.511 on the 960s.
Prop F's a good idea, but it's a double-edged sword in a way, if you will. So we've agreed upon using Prop F employees at the Sheriff's Department for a temporary basis. The problem that we have is usually when we agree to something temporary and it's a cost savings, I feel it gets abused and it's used for longer period of times. And then that solution or that remedy is used instead of hiring. So then we get slow hiring instead of prioritizing hiring and expediting hiring. And then we have issues with our background investigators getting detailed out to vacant positions, and just a constant slowdown. So we're open to solutions. We've provided solutions. We've made agreements. We've done things, short term. We've agreed on Prop F. But long-term Prop F, I feel that the office will take advantage of that and slow hire if we continue that, not hire full-time deputy sheriffs. So that's my concern with that.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great. And that's it for me.
Supervisor Preston.
Thank you, President Peskin, and thank you, Supervisor Walton, for calling for this hearing. I think it's really important. Try not to go over ground that's already been covered, but did want to follow up on to get some clarity on some issues, and also to acknowledge what I think we all agree on, which is the untenable situation currently in the San Francisco jails, including the attacks on deputies, as has been described, the lockdown conditions and their impact on inmates and on deputies. And I just want to say I share many of the thoughts expressed by Supervisor Ronan. I think you really summarized a lot of the frustration that I certainly feel, and particularly on these things that unfortunately do not come as a surprise, but are the expected outcome of the policies over the last couple years. But I want to follow up on a couple of things. First off, this question that both President Peskin and Supervisor Mandelman asked, that was on my list of questions, and to which we still do not have an answer. And I want to drill down on this with the sheriff, but I don't think it's exclusively, you may have this information, I think SFPD has this information, I think the mayor's office has this information, and that is the number of people who are in custody for drug use and possession, not for drug dealing, not for other crimes, but for drug use and possession. And I want to, before you answer this, I want to note what is not an inadvertent failure to provide this information across the board. and lumping together, and I just invite you all, look at every press release from the mayor's office on this, from SFPD. They will conflate drug use and drug dealing arrests in the numbers. You will never see the number. This is how many people we arrested for drug use. And it's because the people of San Francisco are not really on board for the idea of running around arresting drug users. It is, all due respect to Supervisor Mandelman's denial that this is not the war on drugs 2.0. What is it then? Running around with no particular plan, spending mass amounts of resources, arresting people for their drug addiction is like the definition of the war on drugs. And with all due respect, I mean, I would love to hear the argument from anyone of how that is not the definition of the war on drugs. So you always will see, and the reason I drill into this at length before you answer is we have been through this before, not with you, Sheriff, but with the head of Department of Emergency Management at the time the Tenderloin emergency was announced. It took us months, hearing after hearing, of asking for this data to finally have it broken out in the reports that this board received after months of our advocacy, saying, break it down. Like, there should be transparency. We can have a reasoned discussion of whether people think it's a good idea to arrest people for their drug addiction, their drug use, or not. But we can't have any intelligent conversation if we don't have the data, so that we have Supervisor Mandelman sitting here 2 years into this saying, through no fault of his own, I think this is a tiny fraction of people. He has no idea, nor does anyone else, because we don't get that data. And when we do get that data, we get it lumped together, and all due respect, your chart does this, behavioral health people with behavioral health issues. So that includes people with mental illness, that includes drug, it's all lumped together. President Peskin asked for that number. I didn't hear that number. We've been searching for that number. Again, it existed only for the brief time when DEM was reporting on the Tenderloin emergency to this board, because we grilled them over and over. It shouldn't take this. So I'm going to ask, again, maybe you have the data. I think you know the folks who are held in jail, what they're booked on, right? And so it should be a straightforward question of how many people are in jail in San Francisco whose sole charge is the use or possession of drugs. Like today, and then it would be great to get that in recent years. I mean, you and ICE, am I wrong? You and SFPD have that, right?
We have criminal justice data on the charges that are given to people. One thing, you mentioned the sole charge of drug use, and I think what you're really saying is just people with that charge, because a lot of individuals, in custody individuals, have multiple charges.
Sure.
And drug use is just one of a number of charges. Also, when we talk about population that have these types of charges, there's a segment of our justice-involved population that aren't incarcerated, but have those charges as well. And that would be part of, when they're arrested and booked, they may be diverted to electronic monitoring or pretrial supervision through our community program staff. So there's another segment of people who are arrested for just drug use that might be in that as well. I think we have provided that information in the past.
I've never seen it. And our office is, again, the number of hours, frankly, wasted at hearings and in back and forths, and it's mostly been with SFPD and DEM, so I don't want to lay this all at your doorstep. But my colleagues are asking the same question, and it's just so. What is, like? Let's start with this, because I understand there can be people with multiple charges, right? But what's shifted in this city was a decision led by the mayor to start arresting people for drug use in public. That's what the shift was. And what we don't know is it, as Supervisor Mandelman seems to think, this small number of people who were arrested pursuant to that? I'm not talking about people who committed an assault and also were in possession of drugs and they get charged with both. Those people always got arrested. What shifted in this city was people who are using drugs in public getting arrested. And we've got to know what those numbers are to have an intelligent conversation. So can you provide the number of people, let's just start with that, the number of people in custody in San Francisco jail who are charged with drug use?
I can get those numbers. I don't have them with me, though.
Dean, if I could interrupt for just 1 second. There was a December 19th, 2023 press release that said just in the Tenderloin and in Soma that this operation arrested nearly 800 people for public drug use and 700 people for drug sales. So they arrested more people for drug use than for drug sales. That's a snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Supervisor Ronan.
Thank you.
Supervisor Preston.
Thanks. So that is my, let me just make that request that we get that, both the breakdown, not just a lumped category of behavioral health involved individuals, but of folks specifically who are charged with drug use, and I assume we can look at that over time as well. And to same to the mayor's office, same to SFPD, like if we're going to have an intelligent conversation about this stuff, we need that data. Yeah.
Supervisor, with respect, we can give you the information for the current population, absolutely. But if we start to look at, I think Supervisor Ronan referenced that there was a press release before which focused on arrests and citations in the Tenderloin only. That might be more challenging for me to get that data in terms of if we look at regionally where the people were arrested. Right now I can give you the information based on our population for charges and whether or not they're associated with other charges.
Yeah, I think the difference, though, regardless of the issue that Supervisor Ronan's raising or the data, I'm not sure the source of that. I think that was a mayor's office press release. But as it relates to the issue we're discussing around jail population, it actually matters. As you say, there are some people who may be arrested but may not be spending time or significant time in the jail, right? So I would assume that what you have information on, which may be different from SFPD data, but what you have the information on is what the folks who are in jail are charged with.
Yes, and I can provide that for you.
Great, thank you.
Or for the body, yes.
Thank you. The other thing I was hoping you could clarify, we're talking about deputies being deployed and your deployment decisions around the street enforcement work. Does that continue? Like, do you currently have deputies who are deployed in arresting people for drug use or drug dealing?
We do have that continuing right now. I mentioned earlier that our method of staffing that, though, is going to change to a 2-month detail assignment, and individuals will be identified. The undersheriff has made an emphasis on not identifying individuals in the custody operations division in our jails. So we're looking to pulling people for that detail that don't require overtime replacement in their primary duty assignment.
Got it. And just so I'm clear on this, because I heard your responses around that there are multiple places over the past year and a half, I guess, or year. There's multiple places those folks were drawn from, not exclusively from the jails, but that deputies who some of the deputies were drawn from the jails for the street enforcement.
Yes, that's correct. As mentioned by Inspector General Wiley, we have 4 divisions, so they're pulled from different places throughout the department.
And is that in your new configuration going forward? Will it continue to detail folks from the jails as part of the team that's doing street enforcement?
Our focus is to not detail people from the jails for the next 2 months and the next 2-month iteration.
Thank you. You referenced, in response to Supervisor Ronan's questions around what was the plan, that your preference at the time of some of these announcements was to have some sort of sobering center or other non-jail place for detox and treatment. I want to say, as the supervisor representing the Tenderloin that fought, and a majority of this board fought to keep the Tenderloin Center open We were dismayed by the mayor's decision to shut that down before launching this effort, because that actually could have served as the kind of place you're describing. But what happened? I mean, you mentioned you wanted that, but that's not what ended up happening. So what happened to that idea?
Part of our challenge is we depend on a partnership with the Department of Public Health in order to make something like that happen. I do know that their focus in terms of a policy shift away from harm reduction involved creating hubs or something. I believe that the term was hubs, which were similar in nature but did not include our involvement. So we weren't really talking about people who were coming out of custody going to these places. It was more trying to meet people in the moment out on the street and bringing them to these places, which was the same thing we did with Tenderloin Center back a few. So as I mentioned to Supervisor Ronan, our planning, at least on our end for the sheriff's office, was to have an intermediary step where people, I forgot the term that Supervisor Mandelman used, where people can't leave. A place where they wouldn't be in custody, but there would be involuntary detention, for lack of a better term. Similar to like conservancy, the concept would be that they would still be in a place where they would get withdrawal management, structured withdrawal management, but not a place where they were where it was a condition of confinement as part of the justice process.
Through the president to the mayor's office representative, Mr. Polino, going back to the early days when then there was some discussion around the potential of the type of site, non-carceral site, as described by Sheriff Miyamoto. From your perspective, what happened to that idea? Was that an idea that the mayor supported or vetoed, or what happened to that idea?
Thank you for the question, Supervisor Preston. I don't have an answer for you, but I can look into that and get back to you and your staff.
Thank you. I want to address, and I will not go too far down this. We can and will have other hearings on this. I just want to say that the sort of false dichotomy of you either just have everyone doing drugs all over your streets or you start mass arresting drug users is absolutely a false dichotomy. And you know, there are many places in the world that have done this significantly better. They've done enforcement. You know, probably some of what you had in mind, Sheriff, in talking of a jail option here, but of places where, they're called safe consumption sites. They got renamed as wellness hubs, right? This is what they do in Zurich. This is what they do all over the world if they want to not have people doing drugs on the street and dying, and then they have their law enforcement partner with public health that leads the way, and there's a place to take people that's not an overcrowded jail. I won't repeat what Supervisor Ronan eloquently said just about, it's like the idea that it's some kind of surprise that there are people with drug addiction in jail when we've just spent the last year to 2 years deciding to arrest people for drug use and drug addiction is mind-boggling. But there are better approaches. We'll get into those at future hearings, and we've got a report on Zurich's 4 pillars approach, which addresses a lot of this, but I won't go into that here. I wanted to ask to Mr. Paulino, do you know how many people have been arrested for drug use?
Thank you for the question, Supervisor. I do not have that information in front of me, but I can get back to you and your staff.
Thank you. And can we get a commitment that when your press team is issuing the latest statement about arrests, that you will actually distinguish between arrests for drug use and arrests for drug dealing?
Thank you for the question, Supervisor. I will get back to you on that. I'd have to obviously confer with my colleagues.
Thank you. Does the mayor's office contend that arresting people for drug use is an evidence-based approach to addressing drug addiction?
And Supervisor, I unfortunately don't have an answer in front of me, but I'm happy to get back to you and your staff on the question.
Thank you. And a question, thank you, Sheriff. A question for the public defender's representative, Ms. Chan. You raised some issues around access to public defenders having access to inmates, and I just wanted to find out the status of the discussions with the sheriff around addressing those concerns and making sure that inmates have full access to counsel.
Thank you for that question. It's an ongoing challenge. We meet every other week with prisoner legal services in the sheriff's office. They've been very helpful and they've tried their very best, but the issue is that our staff continue to encounter denial when they get to CJ2 or CJ3 asking to visit their client, and they're told it's short staffing, or they're denied because it was during the lockdowns, and sometimes they don't get access at all. They're told there is no time in which you can return. Sometimes they're told maybe in an hour. They'll wait an hour and then they're still denied. And so I have 200 pages of documented incidences of this happening over the last 2 years.
Thank you. I see other colleagues have comments and questions. I will just wrap up with some final comments. No further questions. But I will. I think what we're seeing here, and part of why this has been such an extensive hearing, is not just the dire situation in the jail, but as Supervisor Ronan said, it's totally predictable. This is what you get. This is a complete indictment of the war on drugs 2.0 and of deciding to gut bail reform, gut programs that were actually starting to work and taking steps backward. Like, this is what you get. 40% increase in incarceration, fewer people released on bail, people's lives and families being ruined for being held when they shouldn't be. 50% of the people in jail are black. Like, that stat should be tell everyone exactly what's going on. And I think the one maybe amendment I'd offer to my colleague from District 9's comments is I'm not sure I agree that everyone here didn't have a plan. So I think they didn't have a plan for success and to actually lower addictions and make the community safer. But I think they had a plan. I think some folks involved here had a plan to punish and warehouse people, especially black people in our city, to justify ever-growing police, sheriffs, and DA budgets, which are now, as Ms. Chan points out, over $1 billion in San Francisco, and a plan for, I think the cruelty is the point for some folks, and I think also doing all that for perceived electoral gain is like a reality no one wants to talk about, but it's certainly a driver. So I agree there was no plan for success by any reasonable metric, but I'm not sure that what you're seeing play out is some kind of big mistake, and it's unfortunate. I think there's some folks who, in good faith, maybe didn't see this coming and need to see the movie yet again, but it's a repeat of the past here. So it's unfortunate, but we can reverse that, and I don't think we're seeing evidence that this is working. And I think just because you can reclaim a block or two or UN Plaza by moving people to a couple blocks away to make it a nightmare on 2 blocks away, while you still refuse to open wellness hubs and safe consumption sites and provide the treatment people need, and think we're going to police our way out of this by arresting people for their drug addiction. It is certainly not an evidence-based approach, and it's doing severe damage, and a lot of it's playing out in our jails. Thank you.
Supervisor Safai.
Thank you, President Peskin. Thank you, Supervisor Walton, for calling this hearing. Super important at this moment. What I'm reading from your presentation today, I think some of the information is right here to some of Supervisor Preston's questions. It says over the past year, the average jail population increased by 37%, with the new enforcement of targeting drug offenders, with the prevalence of substance abuse disorders continuing and the need for treatment. So that seems to be, from around 780 a year ago to almost 1,100 today, seems like the vast majority of that would be drug offenders. So it's almost a 300-person increase, all targeting those that are drug users, just to kind of underscore that point. And I just want to go back to some of the other purposes of the hearing, bring it back to the recruitment and what the focus has been on recruitment for the staffing. And I understand, if you look at the jail population, even prior to this most recent push in September, November, January of 2020, it was around 1,300. 1,300, that was the average daily census based on your data. And it doesn't seem like and then 2020, you had 843. So that you have about almost a 120 drop in the number of deputy sheriffs. Can you talk a little bit about what happened during that time over the last few years, and then what has been done in terms of the recruitment? Because even though the population is going back up, it's still not what it was at its height in January of 2020.
Just for reference, are you talking about our staffing numbers, or?
Yeah, so your jail population that I see on your information, the presentation that you provided, was around 1,300 in January of 2020 or November of 19. And then it says here on page 7 that your staffing was around 860, 843 in those years. So even though the number was just a couple hundred more, you still had a lot more sheriffs, and then there's been a drop. So I'm wondering because we had this hearing, Supervisor Walton and I had this hearing on your recruitment efforts for diversification, how you're going about getting more women, people of color. We had that hearing a couple years ago, and your office seemed to be comparable to the police department and the fire department. You all seem to have the most resources, the most diversity in staffing. I just want you to talk a little bit about what's been happening on your recruitment and what have you done, because that drop has been precipitous as the numbers of your population has gone back up. So I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about that.
Appreciate that. The drop, there is a significant drop if you look at the numbers in 2022.
Yeah.
We experienced a number of separations related to individuals who choose not to vaccinate for COVID, and we experienced a percentage of those individuals in addition to our normal attrition that led to that significant drop in staffing. In regards to our recruiting efforts, they've been ongoing, and
well, what's your budget for recruitment?
Not nearly enough of what we should have.
Approximately.
It's baked into our administrative cost budget. I believe we have upwards of 500,000, $500,000 in our budget. I will say, thanks to all of you in the mayor's office, last year we were approved for a full-time recruiter. Prior to that, we had a part-time recruiter, a professional staff position, not sworn, in addition to the one deputy that we've had as an FTE for recruiting. I've asked for additional. We've leveraged our community.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Is that person been hired, and is that person doing the job now?
Currently, right now, we have one person that
is a full-time recruiter hired?
That is a full-time recruiter, yes.
With the deputy?
Yes. We originally asked for 2 recruiters for this
And
purpose.
when did that person start?
Well, they started part-time 2 years ago, started full-time this year.
Okay. With a $500,000 budget on top of that, or does that include the funding for their position?
Yes, and of course, I'd be able to get you the exact numbers from our CFO and our staff. But I do know that we have requested in the past an additional $500,000 for recruiting. I do know that was a part of my budget ask to both the mayor's office and.
And how long has I know it's part of your budget ask, how long has it remained at that level?
For a very long time.
So you haven't really seen an increase in your recruitment budget approved by the mayor's office?
No, a lot of the different things that we're talking about today, including recruiting and hiring, have been items which we have asked for repeatedly, especially during my tenure as the sheriff, and have not been able to fund. Right.
So, I mean, it just, you have this precipitous drop. You have looks like you have about 197 short.
Yes.
And then your numbers are going back up for many of the reasons that Supervisor Preston and Supervisor Ronan talked about. It seemed, let me ask another question. I understand it's the average daily census, but if someone's booked on drug possession, how long, what's the average amount of time they stay? I know oftentimes it's with other charges, but how long are they staying in the jail normally?
Specific to drug charges, I couldn't give you that answer. We do have median lengths of stay that we measure in regards to overall jail population data. We usually share those at Safety and Justice Challenge and with our partners. I don't know how long the average length of stay is at this time, but I can get that information for you.
Whatever it is, it seems as though it's created a burden for your department to the point where families can't see their family members when they're coming to visit. Public defenders can't come in. There's consistent lockdowns. Both your deputies seem to be in harm's way, and then the inmates seem to be in harm's way. So what's your plan to deal with this crisis?
There's many components to the plan to deal with all of this, some of which were touched on by my fellow presenters today. Inspector General Wiley mentioned technology, and I just want to bring this up because I actually have a visual.
But can I ask
the
a
tablets,
question?
yes.
I want you to do that, but can I ask just a basic, it just feels like we have to have a real conversation about the amount of people that are being incarcerated for low-level offenses. Let's have that conversation, and I think that was the line of questioning there. But also, if your budget's remained at $500,000 for years on end as the numbers have gone up, that doesn't seem to be the right level of support. So you can't have one without the other. I mean, there can't be this big push from the mayor's office to do this and then not provide you the resources and put sheriff deputies in harm's way and those that are being incarcerated in harm's way. So doesn't it feel like this is a staffing and or policy issue, and you're on the front lines, you're the sheriff, you have the ability to kind of assert your position based on your experience. That's why I'm asking you just from your gut, what is your, like, besides the tablets, what can we do here?
In addition to the tablets, I've mentioned that getting our people better prepared for this. I do want to touch on a point which is anecdotal, which can't be covered by data.
Sure.
But we're coming out of a COVID pandemic where when we talk about lockdowns, our population prior to the increase was locked down for a significant amount of time during COVID. So as we moved out of that, I have a percentage of our staff. I've hired 290 people since I've been here, all of whom, when they went into the jails, went into a situation where they didn't have to interact with people, where people were behind glass, were in their cells, where there was limited interactions face to face. Almost every single assault that has occurred in the recent months have been in situations where individuals are in close proximity, and for whatever reason, situation arose where the deputies were assaulted. I'm not saying that we're not trained, but I'm also saying there's a gap in experience level. I'm saying there's a gap in a transition for us as the jail population has increased. The need to make sure the rules are enforced has also occurred. And in doing so, I think Zuri Wilson touched on it in his commentary about levels of respect and people actually listening when asked to follow instructions. That's been an anecdotal component of some of these assaults as well. Our staff, if you were to ask me to go back to your question, Supervisor Safai, we needed support and commitment for our staff to be able to go to training, because being short-staffed doesn't just mean people on duty not being there. It also means we can't send our people to training. And we're challenged right now with trying to get them to their required 24 hours of training a year. If you were to ask me if I had a ability to just have anything I wanted right now, it would be to be able to send our people to training, to get that funding and the backfill for that as well. In terms of just direct experience and knowledge, that comes with time. And I know that it's been brought up by the DSA that there is also the challenge of our staff being overworked and tired. I do want to reemphasize that unlike when I was in the department as a deputy, where we were drafted every day, 11 days straight in my personal experience. Having the draft for only 2 days is an attempt by me and our command level staff to provide some semblance of an attempt at wellness for our staff. The down rooms are just a temporary solution. I want to commend Under Sheriff Johnson for identifying renovation on that without asking for, well, I believe we asked for additional funds that were also denied for that as well. But we did want to renovate those down rooms and the areas for our staff where they do have time away from the job itself. And the need for a down room itself is concerning to me personally, because that means that there's a need for our staff to have somewhere to go other than commuting back and forth. And that speaks to a bigger problem with our workforce being outside of the city. Lastly, too, to answer your question in terms of what else would I do, the equipment issue. And I brought it up in passing during the presentation, 2 items. One, the body cameras, which were also brought up by Inspector General Wiley, but also other equipment and other training that our staff could have, which is necessary to remain safe or be safer, would be the additional things that I would do.
Okay, thank you. I know you're committed to that. I know that last year also we had attempted during the budget process to talk about retention pay for so many of your more experienced senior deputy sheriffs that were retiring. I know that that also contributed to some of the other individuals retiring, and it can be something that can stop the flow of that attrition. But if it's okay with you, Mr. President, I also like to hear some of the answers from the deputy sheriffs. I appreciate your frankness, Sheriff.
President Lamba.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to kind of, touch on the comments that the sheriff made. This is part of the problem, the mentality that, since we suffered through mandatory overtime when we began back in the 90s, that it's okay that the future deputies, have to pay their price and suffer through mandatory overtime. It's the wrong mindset. We need a healthy workforce. We need deputy sheriffs. It has to be a priority. We need to make changes to hire more deputies. We can't allow this mandatory overtime to perpetuate affecting the health, the lives, the safety of the deputy sheriffs, of the staff, of the incarcerated people, to have them disadvantaged because we're forced to do this because, hey, it was done before. I've been through this. I have too. I started here in 94. It wasn't pleasant. I don't want to see future deputies go through this too. I don't know of any other agency that does this. This perpetual mandatory forced overtime is unhealthy.
Mr. Lamba, just to underscore that point, I agree. I think mandatory overtime is a very difficult thing, but all of our public safety personnel, because we've been in these budget hearings, whether it's nurses, 911 call operators, fire, paramedics, and police, oftentimes are in the situation, and it's all due to this level of staffing, and that's why I was trying to underscore the point for the Sheriff's Department in terms of how much money has been put into recruitment, and then also to emphasize the point that many of my colleagues have made about the shift into incarceration without a real plan. If there's the idea that you're going to shift and then do mandatory treatment and recovery, there's not the funding for it, and there's no real plan to transition people, because that's only a temporary hold, and then people have to transition back into society. They have to work with adult probation. They have to work with recovery programs. There's no coordinated strategy that we've seen laying out. It's just, let's go arrest everyone on the streets. Great for that moment, if that's what you believe in. But then what are you doing? And then you all are bearing the brunt of that. And ultimately, the population has gone up, and then you don't even have enough staffing to deal with it.
I agree, that the other departments are going through mandatory overtime, but if possible, if you could look at it, I think ours is excessive, more so than theirs.
Well, yours is playing out. I mean, we hear from nurses, and this was one of the debates we had in some of our public facilities, particularly in emergency rooms, when they removed a number of your members in certain places, nurses, assaults on nurses were going up.
Right.
And so a lot of that is the kind of the drug and the mental health addiction playing out in real time on our frontline people. And I've seen some of the photographs, I've heard some of the stories firsthand, and it's awful. But we also have to acknowledge some of it has to do with some of the policy shifts that we've made in a very rapid amount of time without a coordinated strategy, and you all are bearing the brunt of that.
Well, thank you for that. And how do we collectively come together and make policy changes to fix what's going on now? How do we strike out the first step of our pay so we're competitive, like the mayor did for PD, which increased their eligibility list? How do we do these things going forward? Can the Board of Supervisors move that forward and get those things done?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supervisor Engardio.
Thank you, and thank you, Supervisor Walton, for calling this hearing. We have learned a lot today. My questions will be directed to the sheriff. I'm going to take a little bit of a historic route right now.
Okay.
Well, today we are hearing a lot of the problems that we have, like transportation to court, challenges with limited programming, lack of sunlight, outdoor time. So my question is this 100% a staffing problem, or is there any part of it that could be a facilities problem? And I ask that because I recall back in 2015, your predecessor, Vicki Hennessy, the sheriff at the time, wanted to create a new facility here in San Francisco, had access to an $80 million state grant, and this Board of Supervisors at that time turned down that grant, rejected the ability to build that new facility. And I found some quotes from Vicki Hennessy from that era, and she had talked about, she was concerned, quote, I'm quoting here in the Chronicle, I'm concerned we're going to be in a position of overcrowding the remaining jails, which may result in those facilities being more dangerous and difficult to manage. And then another quote she gave to KQED, she said her vision for this new facility was to dedicate the beds to people with mental health issues, co-occurring substance abuse issues. So it's just interesting to me that's almost 10 years ago. Would it make a difference if I know it's woulda, coulda, shoulda, but would it make a difference if we had that facility today? And I know it's a moot point, but I'm just curious if it would make a difference, and is it a cautionary tale? Maybe going forward, you had that idea of like this middle place where people can get the help they need without being able to leave right away. Like in the future, should we maybe consider, if we get state grants or whatnot, to not turn them down?
To answer your question, in your trip down memory lane, I was a part of that. I was very disappointed that we didn't have the foresight. I absolutely understand why Sheriff Hennessy made that statement, because I felt that pain coming in as the sheriff, seeing what's happening. As Supervisor Ronan had asked earlier regarding what my feelings were, and that's what I shared in terms of policy making and what we should do. Back then, the rehabilitation detention facility that was going to be, and it moved from 900 beds as a direct replacement to County Jail 6 and County Jail 7, the 6th and 7th floors at the Hall of Justice. It went from 900 beds down to 236, I believe, with a focus on people with mental health and behavioral health disorders. Almost similar to what I was just talking about earlier, having a place run by DPH, not by the sheriff's office, with the sheriff's office there to help keep people safe. It's unfortunate that we didn't get that. That was actually way back during the time of realignment, and part of the funding for that was to seek that out. My personal feeling is that we're going to be in this, and I have heard others say things in regards to making up for that, kicking the can down the road. Unfortunately, we're here now, and we have to deal with this. I will say, my comments earlier, just to speak to what our staff are experiencing here. It's not that, they should just suck it up and take it. It's to say that I don't want people to go through what I went through, having to be drafted involuntarily 11 times. I don't want that. That's why we've kept it down. That's why I have a concern for our staff, and not just deputies, but people that work in the jail, the attorneys, the nurses, the healthcare, the program people, the CBOs. I'm very concerned about the exposure that we have right now, but it's not all based on being short-staffed. It's also, as we've mentioned, who we have incarcerated right now. And while we've been focused in part of our discussion on individuals who are there under drug charges, whether they're use charges or sales charges, we also have a very large component of our population who have mental health issues, who have behavioral health issues, or who are transitional age youth, where here in San Francisco it's not just up to 24, it's up to 30 or 34 based on experiences, who we want to reach also with our programs to give them an opportunity to do that while they're incarcerated. But that's also part of the population which is reacting to our staff and assaulting our staff. And when you talk to people about respect, right, and when you talk about an individual who has been in our system for a very long time and wants to go to state prison instead of staying in county jail, it's because there's a lack of respect here right now in our interactions. That's a part of what we're talking about right now. So yes, I want to create a safer environment for my staff. The overtime is what is the direct effect of the understaffing. The safety issue is bigger than that.
Thank you. I know we can't go back in time, but I do look at this as a cautionary tale that we can and should focus on creating that facility, whatever name you want to call it. I know I've heard different terms today, but let's come to a consensus. Let's find a term we agree on. But the goal is get people the help they need in a safe environment. And I think we missed the opportunity 10 years ago, but let's not miss it this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And before I call on Supervisor Stephanie, just by way of background, it's been a decade. My recollection was that in order to obtain that $80 million from the state, we needed to have site control over that site within 90 days, which never actually happened because the seller of the property, the McDonald's site, if I recall, did not want to sell. So neither here nor there, but with that, Supervisor Stephanie.
Thank you, President Peskin. Through the President to Sheriff Miyamoto, you mentioned you have 195 sworn vacancies. Are those funded positions in your budget now?
Yes.
Okay, so there's money in there in the budget, just we don't have the bodies. You're not able to recruit. Okay. Yes. So we have 195 sworn positions ready to be filled if for some reason you were lucky and so many people wanted to, you could hire them.
Yes, on our budget, we requested 75 positions this year, 75 last year, with an eye to being realistic about how many positions we can fill. I've always stated, and I've stated publicly and privately to the Comptroller's office, to the Mayor's office, even if we meet 75, I would ask for the additional RTO, I would ask for a request to fund the additional FTE positions.
Okay. With regard to recruitment, I just had a hearing at the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee last week, and the focus was on the police department, and Deputy Chief Pete Walsh presented, and I actually would encourage someone from the Sheriff's Department, if you haven't looked at that hearing yet, to go back and look at that. We actually learned a lot, and I felt like they were on the right path, and maybe even just consulting with them and talking to them about a recruitment strategy. They actually, I don't know how they're budgeting for it, but it was part of their MOU that they were supposed to be setting aside $250,000 a year and working with a recruitment committee. I think they're finally getting on track with that. I think it's something that the Sheriff's Department should be doing as well. So I think really coming back with a recruitment plan, and I think I'm going to fold you into that hearing that I have. I continued it to the call of the chair, so I'm going to fold you into that so we can continue to get updates at Public Safety about what you're doing. Because what concerns me too, a lot of what's been said today, the programs we used to have that people could avail themselves of when they were incarcerated, were incredible. And I know that they are not being utilized like they once were. Take, for instance, the RSVP program that Sunny Schwartz started, which is the Resolve to Stop the Violence Project for domestic violence abusers. And, you know, we always talk about the victims, which, you know, domestic violence for me is something that I care deeply about in terms of stopping it. And this RSVP program was a way to really help those that are stuck in the cycle of being the abuser. And it really reduced recidivism. It was even written about in a book called No Visible Bruises by Rachel Snyder. It's renowned, and they don't have access to that anymore. And what also concerns me, because we've talked a lot about substance abuse disorder, and this is something that I know a lot about personally, and my family, and a lot of members, you know, friends around me that are in recovery. It's just part of my life. And thinking if they're there are plenty of people that want to come into the jails to help. There are people in AA. There are people in NA. There are people in programs that want to share what they have found with people who are suffering from the same disease. And so I really want to make sure we are staffed up so we are bringing that help into the jails. I know so many people who have found sobriety through jail, through, you know, the worst of circumstances. Everyone talks about hitting their bottom and they end up there. And we need to be a jail that has programs in place to help the people that end up there. And if we're not staffed up, it sounds like we're not doing it. And there's more, there's AA, there's NA, there's RSVP, there's so many different, there's 5 keys. I don't even know, when we had the jailhouse services hearing that I called for, I think last year, I really never even got an answer on what programs we actually have and what's working and what's not. So if you can let us know what programs are even working, or what can you not do and what can you do with the staffing you have.
I can let you know that the programs that I know that work are the ones that bring together the cohorts into one housing unit. And that way it's easier for us, instead of having additional staff needs, to move people into those cohorts. And that's the challenge for us right now, is to create those again. RSVP is a great example of one of those cohorts where an entire unit is RSVP. We have our veteran community cover. That's still a cohort that we have in one place, and it's much easier to bring in community-based organizations and members and our own program staff when they're all in one place. The challenge is with things like NA, when they come in, AA, NA, they're volunteers from the community that come in and they speak to all the individuals that are incarcerated and try to bring them together in one place from different housing areas. And that's where the challenge is. We're not able to support that right now because we don't have enough deputies. We always have enough deputies to be in a housing unit. We don't have enough deputies to move people to the different things that you're describing.
Right. And so in the point of AA, people come in and they don't just talk one-on-one. They have a meeting. They bring a meeting to them, an AA meeting,
Yes.
which is an hour-long meeting, which sharing their experience, strength, and hope with how they are dealing with their substance abuse disorder. And if we're talking about substance abuse disorder, and we know there are people who have found a solution and want to bring those into the jails, we need to create situations where they're bringing that in. And that's, of course, recruitment. That's making sure we're staffed up. So, like I said, I'm going to fold you into the hearing that I have ongoing to talk about recruitment. And I would love it if someone could reach out to Deputy Chief Pete Walsh at SFPD to really look at what they're doing for their recruitment as well, because obviously we need to fill these positions. And the last thing I wanted to say in terms of, everyone's getting really animated and reacting to information that may or may not be true here. And I feel like we need a solid picture of what people are in jail for. And because based on my experience being a prosecutor and watching what's gone on here for the last 6 years and being very in tune with the electronic monitoring program and pretrial diversion and what's happening in our jails, I don't think, I would assume, and we know what we say when people assume, but that there aren't hardly any people in jail just for drug abuse or drug use or drug sales. I don't know, but that is the information we absolutely need. And so we know that when people are arrested, it's either a misdemeanor and usually they're cited and released, or maybe it's a felony, or maybe they have another outstanding warrant. So to really get a clear picture of who is being arrested in San Francisco and for what, and then where do they go? Are they in our jails and what jails? Or are they in pretrial diversion? Or are they in our electronic monitoring program? And knowing what I know about the EM program, in terms of who we allow to be on ankle monitors, I mean, I've seen that list. That list has people who have been arrested for rape, child molestation, domestic violence, assault. I mean, so I'm having a really hard time believing our jails are now all of a sudden stuffed with people who are just using meth on the street. I don't think that's happening, or fentanyl on the street, or doing whatever. But I don't know, nor do my colleagues know. So I think for us to really understand what's happening in our jails, we need a de-identified list, of course, of who's in jail and for what, and who's in the pretrial diversion and for what, and who's in our electronic monitoring program and for what. I think that would help us really get the information we need to act accordingly.
These are issues of fact, and it would be good to have those facts. And we do know certain things, which is that our jail population has increased markedly over the last several months. And getting to the bottom of that would, I think, be very good for us public policy makers. Why don't we open this up to public comment, seeing that there are no other names on the roster? All speakers will be allowed 2 minutes to provide your comments. Madam Clerk, would you please call the first speaker?
Yes, if you're here to speak on item number 19, the Committee of the Whole on County Jail Lockdowns, please line up now.
Hello, my name is Joanna Hernandez. Thank you for discussing, Inspector, about the quality of life in the jail. There were days when there was no hot water and lack of access to showers made it harder for any human to stay sane. I'm coming to you as a mother who has a child right now currently incarcerated inside San Francisco County Jail. One, I believe in public safety, because I do. Because if something happens, I am one to call 911 and look to law enforcement for support. I also have deputy sheriffs as friends and family. However, I believe in the importance of rehabilitation. The current efforts, such as providing access to city college courses in the jails, are insufficient to address the deeper issues. We need cognitive behavior, evidence-based programming, and cultural approach to rehabilitation. CBOs are currently receiving funding and don't have full access to meet their numbers and to go into those jails and provide those very services that they are trained to do so. Many inmates are released with no reentry plans. We spend thousands and thousands of dollars on 8420s when only 4 out of, I don't know how many, 8 do the actual work. The others sit and harass civilians like CBOs and make it difficult and uncomfortable to work there. With over 1,000 inmates, it's my understanding that only 200 are receiving partial programming, including my son. The jails go on lockdown every day at 11 a.m. How are we going to be creating public safety? The sense of community and the pods are lacking. Having worked in the jail myself for 8 years straight, 10, 12-hour shifts, I have seen the impact of seasoned deputies who treat inmates with humane and believe in their capacity of change, like Deputy Bryant and Chetta Butler, who qualified.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I have a handout. Good evening, Board of Supervisors. I'm Chris Werklein, as most of you know. For the ones that don't, I'm Chris Werklein. My concern is that Human Services Agency is not here, and we're talking about a system called Sherlock that deals with mental health disorders and substance abuse disorders. So I just passed out a draft copy being presented to the COIT on Thursday morning. It's for all politicians, commissioners, public health, and safety departments. Will you ensure providing information in collaboration with SFPD, the Sheriff, and Department of Justice on recommending indictments on anyone giving access to or using improperly public health safety systems, such as one system, Sherlock, and others to alter a person's mental health, their normal situational awareness, their PTSD, and or using associated ultrasound to cause pain, swelling, false injuries, false illnesses, and death for forced compliance, to illegally influence votes, donations, illegal pay-to-play schemes, alter social outcomes, and to alter for other personal, political, or religious reasons. This is basically a man-in-the-middle attack, and if someone's on a computer or a phone, they can control the conversation without disclosing it to the other party.
Sir, this is not general public comment. This is
Really
okay.
relevant to, I've already handed the information to the sheriff, so thank you. It can be used to influence polls, votes, donations, healthcare, and violence within the jails. These can be done remotely and traditionally on a phone or a computer, or non-traditionally by using voice bots. And unknown to victims, it can be used by anyone with access to influence someone to act on their behalf, or sending racial threats to locals to attempt to force to move, etc. It is exactly what is being used in the jails. It's military-grade technology. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, good evening. My name is Terry Ueda. I'm a deputy with the San Francisco Sheriff's Office. I'm speaking on behalf of the Deputy Sheriff's Association. I've worked for the City and County of San Francisco since 2013. I've worked at County Jail 3 for 10 years. When I first joined the San Francisco Sheriff's Office, we had consistent safety, programs, visits, schools. We were a nationwide model on how to run a jail. Right now, we have a lot of lockdowns, fights, assaults on staff, inconsistent visits, inconsistent programs. There's Board of Supervisors, there's unintended consequences of defunding the Sheriff's Office, free phone calls, closing the 6th and 7th floor, and voting against a new jail. County Jail 2 and 3, they aren't built for today's population. My supervisors, my sheriff, the Deputy Sheriff's Association, we need the San Francisco Sheriff's Office to get more funding, we need more equipment, we need better infrastructure in order to help achieve San Francisco's visions. I have a lot of friends from around the nation. Before COVID, they were envious that I worked for the City and County of San Francisco. Today, they're afraid. You know, they're like, "What's it like to work in San Francisco?" San Francisco can turn the corner, but security has to be put at the forefront. An hour down the road, Santana Road and Westfield Mall in San Jose, they have a lot of shops. They have a lot of tourists. They have a lot of business. We could do the same. Today, Shreve & Company announced they're leaving San Francisco. They're going to Palo Alto. But we need to fund the San Francisco Sheriff's Office in order to make San Francisco secure again so that tourists and business will keep coming back, just like how it was before COVID. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hello, I'm James Irving, Vice President of the DSA. Just want to say funding is the biggest thing I've heard today is funding needs to be the main priority for the Sheriff's Department. We've gone off overtime for, I say, going on 10 years. It's going to get to the point where we're at now, we might be at it now, but it's going to get to the point where we keep on going to that well, the well is going to be dry. We're getting to that point. We need to have proper staffing, proper funding for the sheriff to be able to hire, because it's coming down to that. In the next couple of years, that well is going to be dry. And what are we going to do when we're going to be another 100, 140 down on top of what we have now? So I think it's important for the board here to realize we need the funding for safety and security for the inmates, for the staff, for the deputy sheriffs who are working, the men and women that work every day. We need the funding. So I appreciate if you guys would support the funding for the Sheriff's Department so we can be safe and secure where we work in our environment. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Good evening, Board of Supervisors. My name is Deputy Michael Nguyen. I'm deputy with the Sheriff's Office and also a board member with the DSA. We currently face a significant staffing shortfall at the San Francisco Sheriff's Office with approximately 601 deputies and approximately 18 senior deputies on duty. This challenges our capacity to serve the community effectively, and we are currently seeking solutions to ensure we are fully equipped to maintain public safety. Just to parrot what the Vice President said, we would appreciate your support in trying to get us more funding to fill these positions. I think the golden number would be about, so it says we're negative 153 on the report recently submitted to you. I think we need about 40 million more to get us up to 300, and I think that would be the solution. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Angelica Bach. I am a deputy sheriff, and I'm a current board member with the Deputy Sheriff Association. I've been a deputy for the past 19 years, and this hearing is about the lockdowns and what's happening in the jails. The bottom line, in my opinion, is we are short-staffed. In order for all these programs, in order for all the public safety, for the safety of in our jail, we need more staff. And I just recently spoke to a recruit deputy that I was working with this past week, and he told me it took him 13 months to get hired. In this day and age, totally unacceptable. 13 months is way too long. We're losing potential candidates for that time frame. And I just think that the department should really make that a priority, because a lot of these problems would be solved with more staffing, and so we can provide access to programs, provide access to moving the inmates to court. There's just so much that we could be done with more staffing, because the lockdowns, yeah, just like that mother said, 11 o'clock, we're short-staffed, that disrupts the whole day. 11 o'clock, we get locked down on a weekly basis, and it's hard for us to do our jobs when the supervisor gets on the air and says, oh, we're on lockdown. So now we have to go and give that information to the inmates, which causes problems in our housing area, because they're like, what? We were just had our free time and now we just got to get locked down? Yeah, I'm sorry, unfortunately, and then that causes problems in our pods. And it's hard to manage. Given a seasoned deputy, a new deputy, doesn't matter, it's a hard thing to manage. And that causes problems for all of us. So the bottom line is, just like this supervisor said, what Sheriff Hennessy, it was a missed opportunity. I know I spoke to the sheriff about having a new facility. We are over.
Apologies for cutting you off or providing everyone the same 2 minutes. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Jesus Rios. I'm part of the Latino Task Force here in San Francisco. I came here with my colleague / mentor. He's currently working in the CJ2 and CJ3 sometimes, providing services for our community. I'm gonna read you something he wrote. I'm gonna read it for him. Let me start off by stating that the services we provide are in kind, because we saw it as a huge need in our community. The Latino Task Force runs men's circles with those in custody. We target the Spanish-speaking population for many of our participants. This is the first time that they are being introduced to the community and services. Although the curriculum is deliverable, it is not the value. The value we share in our circles is community. The relationships we start introduce community and services inside the pods currently. We start to create a culture around the community value, and not only does it help build safety in the pods, but it also gives a platform to build off from future programming when they get released. When they are released, we start to plugging them into programs because we already have the relationships that we built inside. This is why I believe one of the solutions is to continue to allocate money in community, wraparound services, and collaboration services, where there is a direct connection between them inside jails and when they are released. We must find a solution together, all of us in community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Packets, please. Thank you. Thank you. To give to everyone, and even one for the mayor and assistant if it's another one. My name is Salah Hakuya Chandler, and I'm truly thankful for being here today to participate in this hearing, because it's truly what I'm hearing is a nightmare. Today I'm passing out a packet. Today is Charlene Tindall's birthday, May 14, and I'm requesting for this to be a day of atonement. He was murdered by a Oakland Police Department with his hands up on his knees. And from there, the mother with the Sacramento government on 201A created a bill that I just passed to you, 1421. 1421 is given to make an order that all police records that the public have access to, request to see all police records, because we have to have an understanding it's two sides to a coin. My compassion goes out to the staff that is being attacked, but we have to understand that we heard a report of 75% of black people, black youth, also adults, you might as well say they're young, is within this institution, and they have been so abused and so murdered for just having a phone, they saying it was a gun, the harassment that has been going on. And now, unfortunately, these nations of people is now taking revenge because they are hurting and they are afraid for their lives. I'm for funding, but I'm really concerned about having the same mentality of having the same minds to come in and to deal with this situation. You have to bring in the community people. You have to bring in the people who has an understanding to the root of why many of them are on drugs. This is the only nation, 75% of blacks, that you haven't dealt with in this country. You're going to have more problems than what you have received. Speaking of the well going dry, it's going to be a retaliation. And my responsibility is to only come here and speak the truth to Pharaoh's kingdom.
Thank
to
you
let
so much
you
for
know.
your comments. Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Otto Duffy. I lived in the aforementioned area known as the Tenderloin. Sometimes we like to call it the North of Market, or sometimes Knob Shoulder. Tell me, number one, first of all, we are in a multi-tiered correction to the COVID incident. We're good, bad, ugly. It's nationwide, multi-leveled, and this is part of it. But now tell me what was not mentioned here in the friction of the situation. What's wrong with this narrative? Because this is what it seems to me is what happened. The national news, the right-wingers, the shock jocks, the Murdoch boys, they want to get, they want to push their item, and they want to make San Francisco, they want to portray it as being socialism run amok. Every Democrat is a socialist, Bolshevik at that, and Nancy Pelosi, and lock them up, and why are we turning police into criminals and forcing vaccinations down their throats, and they'll throw in the kitchen sink and everything else, and then let's let Jesus sort it out. So in response to that, the mayor and even Gavin Newsom, the governor, respond with a crackdown to counter the narrative that we're somehow soft. So, where do you go? You go to the Tenderloin, where it's easy to arrest people. But let's be clear, it's not just for their own jobs, but there's a national audience. There's a nationwide contest. We have two leading people for public office, for president. One of them's a 19th century backwards-leaning, fuzzy-headed, crazy person, and then you have Joe Biden.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Are there any other speakers for item number 19?
Seeing no other speakers, public comment is now closed. Colleagues, are there any final comments? Supervisor Walton.
Thank you so much, President Peskin, and just thank you, colleagues, for really your attention to this matter. I want to thank all the presenters and folks who came out for public comment. I don't want to get too deep into a lot of details because my colleagues have mentioned a lot of the major issues, but most certainly we know that the staffing issues, things that are happening in our jails, are also a direct result of bad policy. And if you look at what's taking place and the strategies that are happening in the jails are also affecting juvenile hall in terms of locking up people who are immigrants, locking up folks with language issues and other disparities that cause the overcrowding that are happening in our system and the shifts in population in the system. So we're going to have more conversation about this exact issue during the budget process, as we know. So I had some follow-up questions, but I will wait because this has been a thorough hearing. But obviously there were questions about services prior to the pandemic that are not being offered anymore, how that would help address deputy concerns and also help keep people safe. So we'll talk about that and other data that was requested from this hearing in the near future. So with that, President Peskin, I would like to file this hearing.
Thank you, Supervisor Walton, and thank you for calling the hearing, and thank you to all my colleagues for taking this very seriously, as well as to the sheriff and the Deputy Sheriff's Association, the public defender, and the Inspector General of the Sheriff's Department, and the members of the public. With that, this public hearing has been held and is now filed. Madam Clerk, can you please go back to roll call for introductions?
Mr. President,